Huh? Three people who looked like bad news eyed me with intimidating glares. I had seen them when Citri first arrived, but I hadn't thought they were with her. They were all bigger than me. Even the one woman in the trio stood over me. They all differed in hair and eye color, but each one looked quite vicious. One had a scar on her cheek, another had a tattoo covering a large swath of his exposed shoulder. The last one had no scars or tattoos, but I could tell by his eyes that he was a cunning one. All three wore around their necks distinct metal chokers that gave off a strange glow. If I ran into this bunch on the street, I'd keep my distance. I definitely didn't want to be riding in the same carriage as them. Not one of them said a word, even after looking at me. There was just an oppressive silence. Ava looked put off. Even when lined up against those of other neighboring nations, the imperial capital of Zeebrugge was among the most prosperous capital cities. Its streets were clean and lined with street lamps. With the exception of the decaying district, the capital was well illuminated at night. It had a large population, and, because of the many rowdy hunters, knights patrolled the city fairly frequently. However, should you take even a step outside the walls of the capital, you'd find yourself in a dog-eat-dog world just as you'd find in any other country. There was no light from man-made sources and monsters appeared frequently. There were phantoms wandering from their homes, just as there had been with the recent White Wolf's Den incident, and there were bandits who might choose to strike. The Empire diverted resources into peacekeeping, but even their inability to stamp out threats should help indicate how dangerous the outside could be. With our carriage going at a steady pace, we left the capital and I was already beginning to regret my decision to go on a vacation. I looked out the window and saw dense clouds covering the sky and hiding the moon from view. The scenery outside was cloaked in almost total darkness, and therefore inscrutable to me because I had no form of night vision. We should have at least departed in the morning, I thought. I'm an idiot. This isn't like the incident with White Wolf's Den. I had the freedom to choose when to depart, yet I chose to go at night for some reason. I want to go back and deck the me from a few hours ago. It was common sense among hunters to leave in the morning, unless you had a specific reason to leave at another part of the day. After all, most monsters and phantoms could see in the dark. Liz, Citri, Tino, and even Ava all knew this. I wish they had at least once asked if I was certain about leaving at night. Sure, the fault was mine, but they seemed to have too much faith in me. I barely left the clan house, much less the capital itself, so this was my first carriage ride in some time. The particular vibrations I felt through my body were strangely nostalgic. Once a treasure hunter started to get financially comfortable, they often began using carriages. This wasn't for transporting themselves, but mainly for conveying their spoils. Hunters who made use of carriages and were competent enough to keep them safe saw explosive rises in their income. Grieving souls used a carriage, but Ansem was too big to fit inside, and both Liz and Luke would run along outside, so it would be only me, and occasionally Lucia, riding inside. Looking back, that was fun in its own way. I wasn't too fond of the recent crucibles I had been thrown into, but those old adventures were fond memories of mine. The carriage Eva procured was a medium-sized one-in-one, likely made with hunters in mind. It wasn't roomy enough that I could stretch out my legs and sleep, but it was sturdy, and the roof was furnished with a seat for a lookout. There was also suspension which helped reduce the vibrations. When taking luggage into account, there wasn't enough room for a full party to fit in a cab, but that was typical as far as most hunters were concerned. The carriage continued to move along regardless of my regrets. Black and white were in the driver's seat, and gray was in the lookout seat. I was impressed at their ability to keep the carriage running in such darkness. It looked like I was once again the only one unable to see in the dark. Owl's eye was charged up, but this wasn't really the time to use it. Sitting across from me, Citri had the map unfolded, and she was glancing at her sister, who sat next to her.
Why aren't you running, Lizzie? You always run.
That's because if I leave you alone with Krai Baby, you'll lay your dirty hands on him. You think I'm gonna let that happen?
I'm just a bit uneasy having white, black, and gray being the only ones outside. I was hoping you would run along outside.
You think you're uneasy? Besides, what's it matter? Killiam and that Chimera are outside. How come you're inside this time, City? You usually take the driver's seat.
That's because I'm testing white and black.
Amid the darkness, Liz and Citri began bickering with flames in their eyes. In one corner of the carriage, Tino, who had been more or less abducted by Liz, was sitting and hugging her knees just like I was. It seems she still wasn't over the incident with the mask. She hadn't said a word beyond some initial greetings and apologies. It was lonely not having anyone to talk to, but it was hard to address her when I knew I'd just be turned down. One thing I could be thankful for was that I didn't have to look at the 3 ruffians Citri had hired. Still, I didn't think there was a person alive who would look at us and think we were headed out on a vacation. Maybe it wouldn't be quite so bad if we hadn't left at night, I began to think, when our carriage was passed by a gray macho atop a strange lion. It was Killiam riding Drink. Killiam gripped the reins with enthusiasm. Their overwhelming vigor made me want to barf, so I looked away from the window. Sitting in silence, I realized something. We hadn't run into many monsters. With that running alongside our carriage, I suppose even monsters wouldn't want to approach us. Drink and Killiam were more monstrous than anything in those woods. They were like something out of a nightmare. In this wilderness, something not meant to be was. Looks like it'll be a safe trip.
Krai, which route will we be taking?
She placed the open map next to a glowing vial, vaguely illuminating it. The map was centered on the imperial capital and showed its surrounding areas. Citri's own notes were scrawled here and there. Our current objectives were to buy time, enjoy a vacation, and meet up with the rest of Grieving souls. They were currently at Night Palace, which was within Zebrudia but a good distance from the capital. Even a straight trip there shouldn't be too arduous. Does anyone have any opinions? Liz gladly answered without delay.
I'll go where you go.
Citri also nodded with a grin. They had always been like this since we became hunters. I kept on failing as a leader, but they were either just too resilient or had far too much faith in me, something I wasn't sure how to feel about. I looked at Tino and, with tears in her eyes, she raised her head and nodded. I want to protect her. Not that I can.
I'll go where you go. Sorry about T. I guess she's lost her confidence.
Yeah, it happens. Liz sounded even more gleeful than usual. I haven't shown Tino my good side in a while. On this trip, I need to at least once remind her she can count on her master. I reached out and drew a large circle around an area between Night Palace and the capital. For starters, let's not pass through here.
Understood. We won't pass through here. Might I ask why?
Gut feeling. Let's not take a single step into this area. The area in question was the domain of Earl Gladys. I might have been talentless, but I had experience. The 1,000 tricks never faltered. I had caused a fair bit of trouble with Lady Claire, so I went and looked up the boundaries of her family's domain. I hadn't accepted it, but they had given me a named quest. Even without accepting them, those things were bad news. I didn't want to think what would happen if I did. Citri didn't seem to mind that I offered no rational explanation for my decision, and just smiled warmly. That made me feel better. By not entering Earl Gladys's domain, we would be taking a much longer route to the treasure vault. Really, the worst thing that could happen would be not running into the rest of Grieving souls, but my policy was safety first.
Understood. Then we'll either cross the mountains to the north or pass through the forest to the west. Mountains or the forest. Where do you stand on this, T? Which sounds better, a thunder dragon or a roving ogre?
Tina looked up and, for some reason, looked at me and not Citri. She wore a timid, squirrely expression. The thunder dragon, needless to say, was a powerful and elusive dragon capable of controlling thunder and lightning. The roving ogre was, actually not something I had ever heard of before. But its mention was enough to paralyze Tino. There's not going to be any dragons or ogres or anything bad. Thunder dragons were a rare breed, sure. They did live in mountainous areas. I had even encountered one in fact, but they were rare even compared to other dragons. Normally, you couldn't find one even if you tried. As for the latter monster, even its name was unfamiliar to me, so I couldn't say. However, I knew a fair bit about forest monsters, so I figured it must be rare if even I didn't know anything about it. Citri was worrying too much. Liz puffed her cheeks, crossed her arms, and offered me fire support.
We're not gonna run into any of those things, City. Didn't you hear Cry, baby? We're out for other humans. Quit making half-assed predictions.
I said there's not going to be anything bad. I guess they just don't have any faith in me.
What's wrong with trying to follow Krai's line of thinking? Sure, I often miss the mark, but I think these are reasonable guesses. Am I wrong, Krai?
There's not going to be anything, I'm certain of it. This is a vacation, not an adventure. I decided I might as well err on the side of caution. I didn't reply to Citri's eager question. I just dragged my finger along the map. Avoiding the Gladys Earldom on the way to Night Palace would involve either traversing a forest or mountains. The forest route would be the longer of the two detours, but it's not like we were in any hurry.
Isn't that the longer way around?
We'd take far too long getting to Night Palace that way. The Flatlands aren't a good place to find rare monsters. Our earnings will be minimal. I may be overstepping my bounds, but I'll remind you not to hold back on the account of black, white, and gray. I believe in taking risks in moderation.
Citri rarely said no to me, but her reasoning was sound. She's a scholar, but I guess she's a treasure hunter at heart. What does she mean by earnings? Usually, I'd let myself be swayed by their arguments, but this was different. I decided to make my stance clear. It's fine. Our objective is to have a good vacation. Here, don't be so worried, Tino. Trust me on this.
It's in danger.
I looked at Tino, who had tears in her eyes, and then at the other two before letting out a sigh. This really is nothing more than a vacation. Life's been hectic recently, and not just for you, Tino. Liz, Citri, you two have both been working too hard. I brought you all out of the capital, but I think you should take this opportunity to rest your bodies. This is just a trip, a vacation, a break from monsters and phantoms. We'll eat good food, take it easy, and do fun things, nothing dangerous. I'm serious. It probably sounded funny hearing that from a guy who only ever took it easy. I had just recently foisted a carcass collecting job onto Tino after all, but it was how I felt. I was both the man who foisted work onto them and the one urging them to rest afterwards. Tino's shoulders shook and she stared directly at me.
See, can I believe you, Master?
Yeah, of course you can, Tino. The moment I began to nod affirmingly, I heard the sound of raindrops. I checked the window and saw that a number of droplets had hit the window in the span of a moment. It was hard to believe that there hadn't been any precipitation just a few minutes ago. The sudden change must have startled the horses because the carriage rocked. The cab was well sealed so no rainwater got in, but those horses out there were living creatures. This would probably be nothing to a platinum Mustang, but it was impossible for a normal horse to run under these conditions. Amid the wind and rain, I heard some small, irritated voices. I began to wonder if black, white, and gray were okay. I managed to hold back a scream. It'd look really lame if I screamed when nobody else seemed to be perturbed. The carriage continued to be slammed by wind and rain, and it didn't seem like it would be stopping anytime soon. What to do? We might die out here. If this storm had arrived a bit quicker, we would have delayed our departure. What awful timing. I began to get cold. I pulled on a jacket and buttoned it tight. This wasn't the first time I had been hit by a storm while outside. In fact, the rain was attracted to me. It was because my luck was so bad. What a sudden torrent.
Shall we step outside for a moment? The horses are rentals, so we should take good care of them.
All right, T. We're gonna run.
Huh?
Liz paid her no mind and stood up and did some light stretches. Perhaps because of the cold weather, faint wisps of steam rose from her body. She took another look out the window and nodded with satisfaction.
What a storm! What more could you want for a training session? You always come through, crybaby! City, you've got some potions, don't you?
We're gonna be building lightning resistance, so could we get a liquid lightning rod, please?
Sure thing.
Come on, you can't pin even the weather on me. Citri pulled out a white glimmering potion from her bag. Liquid lightning rod. I had seen it before. It was an insane potion, made to attract lightning. I had also heard the basic principles of it, but I couldn't really remember them. On top of the lightning rod, Citri quickly lined up a variety of other potions, put them in a unique circular box, and handed it to Liz. Tino was stiff as a board. She looked at Liz with a vacant expression as though this were all some sort of dream. Perhaps her life was flashing before her eyes. Liz Dias. I tried to stop the madness, but Liz looked at me with her brightest smile that day.
Don't you worry, crybaby. She's got plenty of mana material, and she's been training. She probably won't die in a single hit.
Huh, Master.
Jew, a moment. I stopped Liz on instinct. I couldn't let her inflict such a harsh trial on our junior. Tino looked at me with misty eyes. Don't worry, it's fine.
You're such a worrywart, crybaby. It's fine. T's not a kid and she's responsible for herself. My calculations say she has enough resistance, and as long as she doesn't instantly die, City can come to the rescue with her potions.
Her eyes shined as she put forth this insane reasoning. It was incredibly harsh, but this same training was what Liz's mentor had once subjected her to. The only difference now being Liz's participation. What lunacy. There was far too much of a power differential between Liz and her disciple. Tino looked at me with eyes that pleaded for help. It was then that I remembered I had the perfect item on me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out something slimy. The color drained from Tino's face. It was Evolve Greed, my special something for unleashing one's latent powers. I hadn't been sure if I should take it with me, but it was new to my collection, and I thought I might be able to find a use for it, so I brought it along. I couldn't use Evolve Greed, but when Tina wore it, it had enhanced her abilities. Her speed, strength, and her resistances had most likely all increased. Excluding the slight elation it caused, it was a powerful relic, and I had a feeling its psychological effects could be acclimated to. Evolve Greed spoke in a weary voice after spending so much time stuffed into my pocket.
How dreadful that was. Oh, am I to take the stage?
I was certain Tina's lightning resistance would go up if she wore the mask. She seemed a bit traumatized by it, but I hoped she could overcome that. I looked at her with great expectations.
Lizzie, I've decided I want to start training right away.
Tino almost fell over as she flew out of the carriage. Liz sat there wide-eyed, and I held the mask in my hands. Tino had left the door open so strong winds blew into the cab and showered us in rain. After a minute of silence, Liz clapped her hands.
Way to go, Krai, baby! Only you could stamp out T's cowardice so easily. I'm gonna join her, okay?
Lizzie T, I made sure to leave some liquid lightning rods out, so don't forget to take them. Honestly, T, you're so prone to escapism.
Is that really escapism? Liz grabbed a liquid lightning rod and disappeared into the darkness and out of my vision. Burned into my memory was the look of betrayal Tino gave me just before leaving the carriage. I looked down at the gloopy-faced thing I held. Precious things always slip from my hands. Always.
I'll go and prepare the tent. Krai, feel free to wait in the carriage for a bit.
And as if nothing at all strange had happened, Citri began preparing our camp, wearing a grin all the while. Through the window I saw Killiam riding atop a large white chimera and howling in the storm. It was like the end of the world. What a horrible vacation. Thunder boomed as though in an attempt to block out my thoughts. Fierce winds and rain beat against the windows in the lounge of the First Steps clan house. Dense clouds covered the sky and thunder rumbled from time to time. The lounge was filled to capacity. There were people who planned to undertake quests but turned around the moment the storm began. There were people with nowhere to go after their usual enclose due to the weather. There were people who decided they wouldn't be able to go outside the next day either and holed up in the lounge. They all sat at tables and watched the sky through the lounge's large windows. Lyle, whose stomach had made a full recovery, held a bottle of liquor in one hand and rambled in a loud voice. Vacation, he said. Goddamn Krai. It's all going to hell right from the start.
Nothing good ever happens when the CM begins to move of his own accord.
It was common knowledge that the 1,000 trials were not something you wanted to get involved in. No matter how much time passed, they never got any easier. It was normal for a treasure hunter's work to get easier the more powerful they became. The 1,000 trials, however, were different. Because they were trials, they aimed to always push one to their limits. Members of First Steps were considered special because they had overcome these trials. That was fine, but they were sick of being wrapped in these trials without even being asked if they wanted to. Besides, didn't we just do one of his trials? He didn't give us any time to rest. Don't make us risk our lives on a regular basis. Other clan members began to join in.
You're right. I haven't even finished resupplying. He's always hiding information. We shouldn't stand for it. He thinks we'd go out in this storm. He conflates us with people of his level. He conflates us with Liz. Tell us what you're planning. Pay us. Teal us.
Even though Krai himself wasn't present, everyone in the lounge became riled up. They stood shoulder to shoulder and shouted to the ceiling. Isabella and Ew, who had both chosen not to participate, faced each other and let out exasperated sighs.
Everyone here sure gets along nicely.
I suppose Liz and Citri are fine, but I wonder about Tino.
Grieving souls were used to these sorts of trials, but she was worried about the junior clan member who had been swept along. Once you were caught up in one of Krai's 1,000 trials, there was no escaping. The sky seemed to almost respond to Isabella's worried gaze as it suddenly began to light up. A panicking clan member dashed into the lounge. They didn't seem to care that they were drenched head to toe.
Hey everyone! Big news. Hidden Curse is going to war with Akashic Tower. Their top members are on the move, and we're going to be feeling the shockwaves.
This caused an instant shift in everyone's mood. Hidden Curse was an old clan and considered one of the best even in Zeebrudia. Their clan master, the level 8 Abyssal Inferno, was known for her intensity that matched up even with grieving souls. If Hidden Curse came into direct conflict with another group, there would be no telling how much collateral damage might occur. The Explorers Association might start dispatching their own. Lyle scratched his head and wore a look of despair.
Damn Krai, he said he's going on a vacation.
Other hunters joined in.
Ah! We've been had, and we had just been freed from drink.
Isabella let out a deep sigh as she watched as her fellow clan members began to once again scream and shout. Tremendous rain and wind blew across the dark plain. The continuous bolts of lightning and their thundering impacts seemed almost lethal. Hunters were still human and therefore in many ways helpless before nature's might.
Shit, a storm. You've got to be joking.
The storm hit him from the side, his single jacket only doing so much to protect him. His loud curses disappeared into the winds and went unheard. From the top of the carriage, Gray, the unwilling lookout, hopped out of his seat and down to the ground. In the driver's seat, Black and White were drenched in rain and trying to calm the startled horses. From the corner of his eye, Gray caught sight of that infernal woman calmly setting up a tent, unbothered by the storm. She removed the tent from the piled-up luggage and assembled it with practiced hands. Through wind and rain, mud and darkness, she moved without pause. She wore a thick robe and a large backpack. She didn't particularly resemble a hunter with her refined looks and lack of weapons, but her skills removed any doubt that she was indeed a hunter and a first-rate one at that. But what distinguished her more than anything was her expression. She didn't look perturbed in the slightest. Her eyes suddenly shifted towards Gray as he alighted from the top of the carriage. Lightning flashed, and those pink irises flitted from gray to white to black. She was just one small woman. The three of them had been taken down by the other one, the infamous Stifled Shadow. And she had left the carriage in spite of the raging storm. That indescribable chimera was nowhere to be seen, either. This looked like a good opportunity to flee. Visibility was low, but they hadn't gone too far from the capital, and it would be hard to pursue someone in the storm. As Gray considered this, Citri Smart furrowed her brow with displeasure.
White, Black, Gray, you've finally gotten your chance. Don't do anything to embarrass me.
There was just one issue, and that was the collars around their necks. The grimy collars were a form of magical artifact, and they were originally intended for restricting the movement of slaves. Slavery wasn't practiced in Zeebrudia, so these collars were a rare sight. But after spending many years in the underworld, Gray was familiar with what they could do. By pressing a remote switch, the wearer would feel a strong electric shock. It wasn't as strong as a relic, but it could deliver a powerful and stable flow of energy for a long period of time. Even someone with high levels of mana material wouldn't be able to hold out forever. The collars were durable and relied on in certain countries that employed slave labor. They were also designed to give a strong shock if they were hit hard enough, so one couldn't even attempt to remove them. Gray and the others were bound by an invisible chain, and Citri didn't seem like the type to hesitate before giving them a shock. In fact, this sort of item wasn't even something you could obtain in Zeebrudia through conventional means. Gray figured White and Black had both reached the same conclusion. If they had all responded to Citri Smart's sudden summons, it meant they were all in agreement. They had screwed up. They shouldn't have taken that job to retrieve the item from the auction. It was too late for regret. The die had been cast. Some hunters were good people, but grieving souls, the ones who had caught Gray and the others, were clearly the opposite. These hunters could have just handed Gray and his cohorts to the guards, but instead chose to keep them under their control. If they did that, then these hunters probably wouldn't even hesitate to kill them. They could consider their lives forfeit if they didn't comply. Really, it was possible they might even be liquidated without any particular reason. All Gray and the others could do was what they were told and pray they didn't invite the hunters' wrath. Even if all that awaited them was their demise, they had no choice but to pretend otherwise and keep on living. Then a thought occurred to Gray. If all three of them attacked Citri, couldn't they take her down before she could press the switch? They could take her down and steal the switch. If they could just do something about the collars, it was possible they might obtain even a small degree of freedom. White, Black, and Gray all specialized in dealing with hunters. They rarely took targets head-on, but they were confident enough in their strength. The fearsome man in the carriage seemed like he could be a problem, but he didn't seem too interested in Gray and the others, so perhaps he could be negotiated with. This might be the first and last time they'd see Citri defenseless and separated from her comrades. They could keep obeying her, but things would only get worse if they continued down that route. Fortunately for Gray and the others, their weapons hadn't been confiscated.
Gray made up his mind and raised his head, but at that moment blinding light tore the darkness and a tremendous rumbling echoed about. The sensation shook Gray's vision, and he stumbled. White and Black desperately tried to calm the terrified horses. Lightning struck nearby. Gray instinctively closed his eyes and covered his head. He heard a quiet voice.
Still not used to lightning, are you?
Gray hesitantly opened his eyes. Citri was standing close and looking up at him. Under the circumstances, her calm eyes and the smile on her lips didn't look fearless, but rather insane. Citri removed a potion from her pocket and pressed it into Gray's unsteady hand.
You see, I became used to the lightning long ago. The trick to developing resistance to lightning is listen well now, to be continually struck by lightning. The first time it happens, you'll nearly die, but if you repeat the process, then your mana material will strengthen your body in that direction. The liquid lightning rods were developed for that purpose.
Madness inconceivable. Suicide. Gray wanted to write off her ideas as any of these things, but Citri didn't sound like she would permit that. It was well known that a hunter's will could affect how they were strengthened by mana material. It was also well known that all high-level hunters made use of that function. However, even with that in mind, what Citri was suggesting didn't sound like it could be described with a tepid word like training.
Gray remained speechless and just looked at the potion in his hand.
Oh, that's right. If you develop greater lightning resistance, the shocks delivered by the colors might become bearable. How troubling. This weather is optimal, isn't it? Perhaps it's a message from Krai. Perhaps he's saying, if you've got the resolve, then you can run.
A message? Lightning struck again. What a thunderous night it was. Gray thought he heard a faint scream somewhere. Gray, White, and Black were all standing stock still. Citri smiled.
I hate to ask this of you, but could I ask that you guys look after the horses? I can't rely on Killian for these sorts of matters. And don't worry about the tent. I'm used to these sorts of situations. I'm afraid you'll only get in my way.
Citri turned her defenseless back to them and went back to setting up the tent. Within the glass vial shoved into Gray's hand was a glowing white liquid that he had never seen before. He decided to rethink his escape plan. The 1,000 Tricks. The leader of Grieving Souls had reached level 8 at a younger age than any other hunter in the Empire. His strength and cunning knew no bounds. He was an elusive figure with innumerable victories to his name. Yet, despite his prestige, nobody knew anything specific about his powers. Chloe Welter had picked up many rumors of this man throughout her time as an employee of the Explorers Association. His preternatural intellect caused him to be feared not only by his enemies but even by his allies. Among the hunters of First Steps, his incomprehensible power and almost prescient schemes were referred to as the 1,000 Trials. On occasion, Chloe would also hear preposterous tales of this hunter from her uncle Gark, the association branch manager. Yet, despite all this, she still hadn't expected the 1,000 Tricks would just leave her behind. She understood that expediency was necessary in a hunter's line of work, but this was just far too absurd. To think she had been nervous about accompanying him on his duty, all for it to lead to this. The rumors were right, he was unpredictable. The sun had set a while ago, and a storm raged outside. This wasn't the sort of weather to be traveling in. What awful timing, the clouds had just begun to gather when Chloe had been given her orders to go after the 1,000 Tricks. The carriage was all ready and waiting for her. Chloe quickly finished her preparations and ran off to the gate. She spent most of her time in her Explorers Association uniform, but had now eschewed her professional garb for travel-appropriate attire. These were clothes she had prepared long ago, back when she aspired to be a hunter. Now for the first time in a while a sword hung at her hip. Near the gate was a carriage bearing the insignia of the Explorers Association and the hunters that had been hired to escort her. They stood beneath a rudimentary shelter and looked at the sky with dissatisfaction. The red-haired man at the front of the group noticed Chloe and called out to her.
Are we really gonna go in this awful weather?
We are. This is urgent business.
Gilbert, that's no way to speak to a client.
No, I don't mind. I understand that there are conditions which hunters prefer to avoid.
The other hunters behind him all nodded in agreement. The sky was dark and rain was coming down, but a certain brightness shone in their faces. Quests issued by the Explorers Association paid very well and were only offered to hunters who were deemed to have potential or to be trustworthy. Chloe's guard consisted of the promising solo hunter Ruta Runebeck, as well the party's scorching whirlwind, which included the well-known Gilbert Bush. Chloe had few complaints about a party like this. Gilbert had once been known for being a disagreeable sort, but he had purportedly calmed down recently. However, the primary reason they had been selected for this job was that Ruta and Gilbert knew Krai through the White Wolf's Den quest. This task wasn't a particularly difficult one, and they knew their final destination. The only aspect warranting concern was that they needed to catch up to Krai. Chloe clenched her fist and looked over the party before her.
Speed will be paramount for this quest. We have to do whatever we can to meet up with Krai before he arrives in the Gladys Oldham. Of course, the 1,000 tricks would most likely be fine even without Chloe, but he tended to be rather flippant when it came to matters of authority. He was perhaps even as flippant as Solis Rodin, the ancestor of Ark Rodin. The 1,000 tricks had shown an inclination towards giving credit to others, and that was cause for concern at the Explorers Association. Modesty was laudable, but everything had limits. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that this task would be pivotal for future relations between El Gladys and the Explorers Association. One reason Gark had sent Chloe after Krai Andrey was that it would be a good experience for her. The bigger reason was so she could ensure that Krai took his paycheck. Of course, Chloe's previous attempt to join First Steps was also a relevant factor.
I still can't believe that even a level 8 would... No, let me rephrase that. Because he's a level 8, I can't believe he'd go out in this weather. There's not just monsters, but also lightning to worry about.
Carmine Scion. He was a heavy warrior with a calm demeanor and the leader of Scorching Whirlwind. Carmine wasn't wrong, but Chloe knew better.
Considering his past experience, I don't think the 1,000 tricks would be scared of a storm. In fact, I've heard stories of him leading charges straight into storms.
Really?
It was a true story, believe it or not. It was common sense that even a hunter was no match for the forces of nature, but apparently this didn't mean much to a level 8. It made a degree of sense. Rain was no issue, and a lightning bolt wouldn't do much to someone of a high level.
There's no need to worry. Lightning doesn't strike that frequently. She didn't particularly want to go out in this storm, but she felt Krai was sending her a message by leaving her behind. This was one of his 1,000 trials. These trials would occasionally pull in people from outside First Steps, and now it was happening amid inclement weather. Chloe both hated to lose and had once aspired to be a hunter. It would be impossible for her not to be excited under these circumstances. The 1,000 tricks is also in a carriage, so we should be able to catch them. Not to mention, our horses of a different sort. If we hurry, we'll be just fine. Rather, the more time we give them, the more complicated their route might become, and that will make it harder for us to rendezvous.
Their carriage was hooked up to an iron Mustang, a powerful equine monster. It wouldn't lose to a normal horse.
Understood. I don't really see the monsters in the area won't give us any trouble.
As an employee of the Explorers Association, Chloe knew her way around a battle, and she regularly absorbed mana material. She also was adept with a blade. She wouldn't prove a hindrance to Scorching Whirlwind.
But be careful. Tino, an acquaintance of Krai's, said he likes to get himself wrapped up in trouble.
That's just fine. The work of a high-level hunter is of interest to us at the association. Besides, per our initial plan, I was to accompany Krai on this trip.
Somehows, I wouldn't count that as a good thing.
The White Wolf's Den quest must have been quite an ordeal because Ruta's smile was a fatigued one. Just then, a boorish voice called to them from behind.
Krai, did you just say Krai?
Let This Grieving Soul Retire by Chukikaj, cast by Artail Studio. If you are interested in creating your own audiobooks, please check out our website at artail.ai. Now, enjoy the story. It was unease and anxiety that were keeping her awake. Under these abnormal conditions, she was restless because she had no idea what might happen to her, and she was nervous that she would embarrass herself in front of her master and her mentor. It was a struggle, unlike any she had faced yet. Through sheer will, she somehow managed to maintain her composure and not let her eyes stray from her master. She had heard of the red flag that meant to beware of monsters, but this was the first time she had ever seen it. This was in part due to the fact that she rarely left the capital, but more than that, most cities avoided indicating that they were in trouble. It was a matter of pride, but it also revealed a moment of weakness that other countries or criminals might try to take advantage of. The larger a city, the less it tended to raise its flags. Tino had heard that in the long history of the Zabrudian capital, the city had only raised its flags a handful of times. Gula wasn't nearly as large as the capital, but it was still famous for its chocolate production, so it was possible something truly dire was threatening them. Through the number of knights and magi by the gates, Tino got a glimpse of how cautious the town was being. Employing so many people couldn't have been cheap. This wasn't the sort of caution you would take over a slight misgiving. There must be a very real fear of the orcs. She realized that the words from the guard at the gate were simply meant to dispel their worries. Tino hadn't believed a single word of her master since their vacation had begun. She didn't think he was being dishonest, but experience had taught her that no big deal for him was no big deal for the impervious 1,000 tricks. Tino was neither of these things, so it was very much a big deal for her. If they weren't going to participate in any battles, then there was no reason for them to come to Gula in the first place. Everyone in First Steps knew that the 1,000 tricks liked to get your hopes up before crushing them. Tino couldn't even begin to guess as to when her master might have learned of a flag being raised here. But if he hadn't known, then why else would he have chosen to come to this town when there were so many alternatives? Thoughts swirled about Tino's mind.
I understand, Master. To you, a battle with an army of orcs isn't even worthy of the name, but it's too much for me.
She was certain that her master was going to send her after a band of orcs for the fun of it. In her usual state, Tino could wipe out a number of them with ease. She could manage even the tougher of the bunch as long as she took them on one at a time. But Tino was exhausted. It might have been her own lack of experience that prevented her from resting during the journey, but it would still be suicidal for her to challenge a band of orcs in her current state. Thieves weren't suited for fighting multiple foes at a time. It was easy to forget this while watching Lizzie in action, but their main duties were tasks such as sneak attacks, reconnaissance, and disarming traps.
Master wants to teach me the secrets to multi-target combat, one of my weak points. I can't do it.
Tino found herself jealous of the gleeful Smart Sisters. Her sleep-deprived brain failed to keep her thoughts in order, preventing her from making any sound judgments. Her extravagant Spartan training once again made her want to cling to that back she was always walking behind. In Aelin, some hunters had defeated the lightning elemental, but Tino didn't think that same miracle would happen twice. She had to fight. If her master was subjecting her to a trial, then it was because he thought she could overcome it, because he expected her to. Tino had undergone hellish training so she could live up to those expectations. Her master had said he would protect her if it became necessary. That had let her forget her fatigue for an instant, but she couldn't depend on him forever. Her goal was to stand by his side as an equal, not be protected. She didn't know just how many orcs there were, but, considering previous trials, it would be a considerable number. It could very well be too many for her.
Maybe there are unlimited orcs? Possibly. Master, I can't do it.
Huh? You have another hideaway in Gula?
But of course, you never know what might happen.
It was then that Tino felt she had an idea as to why City was so overprepared. With a fuzzy feeling, she made up her mind. If she got the chance, she would prepare for any contingency. But first, she had to live to see the next day. Tino had an idea. Unlike Lizzie, who brute-forced her way through everything, City specialized in more underhanded methods. She might teach Tino how to fight multiple enemies at once. Tino had trouble interacting with City, but that didn't mean they were on bad terms. City required caution and awareness, but the two of them had a common ally in Krai. Sometimes she could be a bit touchy, but there seemed to be a line she wouldn't cross. She would probably help Tino if she asked. What Tino didn't know was what sort of compensation City might demand. When would the battle with the orcs happen? Night? An hour from now? Would they attack? Or would Tino have to hunt them down? Would she get a chance to rest? Would she get time to prepare? Or would she have to manage in her current state? With the current training restrictions in place, this last possibility seemed feasible, and also the most strenuous. With her master's trials, it was safe to assume the worst.
I can't do it.
Tino desperately tried to work her tired, sleep-deprived brain. Suddenly, her master turned around. His pitch-black eyes almost seemed to stare straight into her mind. Unlike Tino, he looked calm and without a single worry. Well, Tino's also looking tired. Let's have a good meal and relax for the rest of the day.
I'm my last supper?
Perhaps the orcs would attack during the meal. As if mocking Tino for her cowardice, No sign of trouble ever came. City's hideaway in Gula was identical to the one in Ellen. The supplies and the furniture were the same. You almost had to make an effort to notice the differences.
Universal specifications make things easier.
She handled the cooking and made an exceptional meal out of the stocked provisions. It was hard to believe she was related to Lizzie, who never cooked. Tino had some confidence in her culinary skills, but nothing she made compared to this. City must have practiced so she could find her way to Krai's heart through his stomach. On the surface, this vacation really was just a vacation. Tino hadn't fought any monsters and she hadn't had to pay for her food or lodging. It would be so wonderful if the free ride was payment for her services as a bodyguard. The word vacation ate away at her. It was a word normally associated with fun. She felt like she was falling apart. She was on edge. She just wanted to train, even if it was something so savage as to make her lose her lunch. It would still be better than the current situation. Her head wobbled side to side, burdened with these thoughts, when she found herself interrupted by Krai clapping his hands together. "Oh, right. Tino, why don't we get chocolate parfaits tomorrow? There's a famous place in town." Tino hadn't expected this. Her response came after a brief delay. She liked sweet things, and she had accompanied her master many times before on these sorts of outings. However, she hadn't yet done anything warranting a reward. Both Lizzie and City's expressions clouded when they heard his suggestion. They didn't care much for sweet things, and so it was only Tino who got to enjoy these occasions. As a sort of protest, Lizzie jumped on Krai's back and wrapped her arms around him, but his expression didn't change. City's smile returned to her face, but the glare in her eyes made threats on Tino's life. Tino wanted to join her master, but she couldn't permit herself to agree.
Master, I haven't done anything to warrant a reward.
That's ridiculous. I think you're working very hard. Besides, sweet things are good for when you're tired. Krai's smile was genuine. He was always so kind. He wore that kind smile when he gave Tino challenges to overcome.
But
I don't really care about accomplishments or whatever, but if it really bothers you, here, if something happens, you can just do your best when the time comes. It's important to rest every once in a while. Tino, you don't look well. Tino vaguely looked towards Lizzie with a questioning glance. Her master's words were sacrosanct, but she had to show respect towards Lizzie if she didn't want to be subjected to brutal training. Lizzie noticed Tino's glance and furrowed her brow as she collapsed on the sofa.
Sounds like a good time!
Huh? Lizzie? I'm
not stupid. If I go along, then I'll just be in the way.
Lizzie was known as the Stifled Shadow and was feared throughout the capital. Krai was perhaps the only person who might be able to think of her as in the way.
Krai's right, T. It's important to rest. I'll plan out all the details for tomorrow so you can relax.
In those pink eyes, the same color as Lizzie's, there glimmered a light. It threatened to end Tino's existence. The sun began to set. With the bulwarks of Gula in the distance, black, white, and gray pitched a tent, moving quickly and silently. A sullen mood hung over them. They had a carriage, plenty of food, and the person who collared them was nowhere to be seen. Yet they still couldn't make their escape. A pair of eyes stared at them. They had seen a plethora of odd creatures, but this one was entirely unlike the rest. The creature had bothered them ever since they first caught sight of it running alongside the carriage, but they made an effort to not think about it too much. It had gray skin and a well-built body. It wore nothing but a red banana hammock and a brown paper bag with 2 eye holes cut in it over its head, as if put there as a joke. It was unmistakably a monster, the loyal beast of that demonic alchemist. They didn't think they could win it over to their side. To their attuned senses, an enormous amount of mana material radiated from it. Its muscles clearly weren't just for show. And then there was its gaze, devoid of any trace of emotion. Apparently, its name was Killiam, but that didn't really matter. Black tried to imagine what sort of methods that alchemist must have employed to build such a beast, but she immediately stopped herself. She was certain that the alchemist had dirtied her hands with much more heinous acts than she, white or gray, had ever done. She was also certain that those hands might come at any time for her and her cohorts. Sitting near Killiam was a white lion, a chimera almost 2 meters long. It let out a growl. The chimera wasn't nearly as bad as Killiam, but it was still something they would generally avoid fighting, as the creature's strength was an unknown quantity. All the monsters on the road had fled when they saw it. It probably wasn't weak. She could see it catching up to them if they tried to flee with the carriage.
She told us to look after this thing. How the hell are we supposed to do that?
Gray didn't say anything, but he looked just as much at his wits' end. Black had done a variety of jobs in her career as a criminal, but she didn't know how to take care of a chimera. The alchemist had said they should be able to handle everything on their own, but she hadn't even told them what to feed the thing. The provisions in the carriage didn't seem like they would be enough to sustain such a large body. Citri didn't seem to be feeding it, and they didn't know how it had nourished itself during the journey so far. Black made up her mind and approached Killiam and the chimera. Drink, was it?
What do you eat?
Killiam slowly turned towards Drink.
Kill, kill, kill.
Meow!
Kill.
Meow! Meow!
Perhaps being monsters gave them a sense of camaraderie? Killiam had a very high-pitched voice for such a large creature, while Drink's meow was quite endearing.
What's going on? Are they talking to each other?
The conversation ended after only a few words. Killiam turned to Black, and Drink lazily stood up.
Kill!
With that one word, Killiam leaped into the air. With surprising flexibility, it landed atop Drink. The chimera dashed off at extraordinary speed. The two silhouettes gradually grew smaller. Black didn't know what to say. Neither did White or Gray.
They ran off.
There was no reason for them to run. Neither Black, White, or Gray had done anything. This wasn't good. But
They ran. We gotta go after them.
But
We were supposed to take care of those things. We'll be killed if Citri finds out that they got away.
proof wasn't necessary. All Citri needed to liquidate them was a hunch. There was no doubt in their minds. A cold, ominous wind suddenly blew over them. A black forest lay in the direction they had seen Drink and Killiam run off to.
how are we gonna chase them? Where'd they go?
How should I know? Let's just get a move on.
The beast dashed through the forest. It was a chimera, an accursed creature born by warping the fundamentals of life. It resembled a lion, but the wings on its back made it clear that it was something far less conventional. Someone with a good nose might notice the perverse scent it gave off. It ran like the wind through a mountain road, lined with dark trees, a berserker riding atop its back. The rider's gray skin and muscles were fortified, its body burning to the touch, in stark contrast to its dull color. It had the scent of a human, but its monstrous form was the result of the profane. Chimeras usually only took a liking to their creators, but if it was running along with the berserker, then it must have instinctively known that the two were, in a sense, kin.
Kill! Kill!
Kura!
They felt no fear. Even if they did, it wouldn't show. Drink and Killiam were made to be exceptionally strong, to be a shield if necessary. The smell of monsters was everywhere on the mountain path. It was the smell of orcs. Drink was a merging of the best parts of various mythical beasts. As far as it was concerned, this was the smell of food. They were hungry. They were both designed so they could work even without eating for limited stretches. But that only meant they could endure the miserable pangs of hunger, not ignore the feeling entirely. They had caught and eaten monsters while traveling, but those that got near the road didn't amount to much. Drink and Killiam had empty stomachs, and ever since arriving at Gula, the smell of orcs had been nagging at them.
Kill! Kill! Kill!
Meow!
To interpret, let's get this over with quickly. No need to tell me. Or something like that. Drink caught a sign of their prey and sped up. A fort illuminated by torches came into view. The building was a simple construct about what was typical of orcs. There were lookouts, but Drink and Killiam had no cause for concern. Killiam acted as the vanguard. Its muscles began to ripple and expand, and Drink held its tail straight as a blade. Both creatures were amalgamations made to fight. Show no fear, kill, eat. The beasts of the ignoble set upon the fort. It was like a natural disaster. The orc pack had been formed by multiple smaller packs joining together. On the slope of a mountain, they had built a sturdy fort atop the ruins of an abandoned village. Reigning over the fort was King Schwartz, an aberrant orc born in a remote region rich in mana material. His strength and intelligence far exceeded normal orcs. He could comprehend the words of humans, and had the charisma to lead a coalition of multiple tribes. Cementing his status as unique among his peers was his weapon, a powerful sword he had stolen from a human he had slain. However, the orc hero's kingdom crumbled in an instant. The disaster came in the form of a bone-chilling monster. It had a scent that invited doubts that they were truly of this world. The vile creature jumped the outer walls with ease, ignored the lookout, and headed straight for the deepest reaches of the fort. This was where the orc women and orc children were kept. By the time Schwartz realized what was happening, it was too late. The wretched beast had eaten the pack's future, its children, and torn its beloved women to shreds. The Orc King had seen many tragedies, but he still couldn't bear to look upon this travesty. The stench of blood permeated the air, and screams layered atop more screams. The creature let out a feline cry. It wasn't even fit to call a battle. Against a human, the orc warriors would have bravely risked their lives if their king ordered it, but the wretched form and otherworldly scent of the creature had them frozen with fear. Only Schwartz properly understood the situation, for he possessed the rationality to not be driven by instinct. This was a trap laid by the humans. They had realized they wouldn't be able to take the fort head-on, so they resorted to cowardly methods. There was just one beast, and Schwartz had 1,000 hardy warriors at his command. They couldn't lose as long as they kept their composure. His instincts, rationality, and intelligence all gave him confidence. However, his orders didn't get through. He was the only one with the strength and intellect necessary to resist his instincts. Screams drowned out his commands and his soldiers, and the remaining women turned their backs on him as they raced to abandon the fort. Only Schwartz understood how foolish that was. The beast's objective wasn't just to eat, it was to destroy. With wings and a lion's head, its eyes displayed savage glee. It was the same sort of glee Schwartz felt when attacking a human settlement.
Fight!
Like a zephyr, the beast charged after the appetizing backs of the fleeing orcs. It easily outpaced its prey, and its claws tore through both armor and flesh in a single swipe. Every part of it was made to kill, even its whip-like tail and its roar. Schwartz let out a howl of rage. He didn't want any more of his pack to die. With thunderous footfalls, he charged at the beast, his black greatsword raised above his head. His foe was an abomination, but he was a veteran of many battles. With fierce determination, he was about to strike at the beast's weak point, its flank, but suddenly something fell from the sky. He instinctively raised his blade and blocked it. Despite his readiness, his arms grew numb from the immense weight pressing against his blade.
Kill! Kill!
A large warrior of comparable size to Schwartz had fallen. It had an outline close to a human's, and it smelled like one, but it was no human. He could tell that its might exceeded that of any of orc under his command. Reinforcements had arrived for the other beast. Schwartz bit his lip and took a step back. He couldn't win this. In spite of his boiling rage, he accepted defeat. The gray warrior bunched his fists and took a fighting stance. The beast stopped feasting on the orcs and moved around to surround Schwartz. He could handle one at a time, but two at once was impossible. His death was certain. Corpses of allies, warriors, and women were piled up throughout the fort. Even though the attackers had been only a single beast and humanoid, the bodies in the fort far outnumbered those who had successfully escaped. As king, Schwartz couldn't allow himself to give in to rage and perish here.
You die!
Never in his career as a hunter had Arnold seen such a large pack of monsters in one place. There were more glowing eyes than anyone could count. The stench of beasts and blood was carried on the wind. Most were orcs, but plenty of other monsters were mixed in. The well-trained mustangs cried with fear. Chloe and everyone in Scorching Whirlwind was pale as a ghost. Who could blame them? Even for the seasoned hunters of Falling Fog, this was a gathering of monsters vaster than any they had ever seen. Under normal circumstances, a single party would never run into a pack of such a scale. At least nobody was fleeing. A personified chaos, the monsters moved across the plain like a tidal wave. They trampled one another and moved almost as if something were drawing them in.
They've gone completely insane. Did a spell do this? Or some sort of drug?
But this was no time to be worrying about the cause. A's comrades formed a defensive formation, and Amagus began the incantation of his most powerful spell. Falling Fog was a party that specialized in hunting large monsters, and mostly contained members trained for close-range combat. They had no magi who could use wide-area spells. Everyone looked ready to die, but that resolve was unnecessary. They would fight through and win like they always did.
We won't be able to protect you. You'll have to look out for yourselves.
His sword was made out of the bones from the thunder dragon they had defeated. He tightened his grip, and the blade crackled with lightning, almost as if it could still remember when it was a part of a dragon. Equipment made from the parts of monsters possessing powerful magic exhibited some of the same powers the monster did. Arnold's sword, the source of his moniker Crashing Lightning, was one of the finest examples of this. Equipped with a weapon only permitted to a dragon slayer, orcs were a trifle, no matter their numbers.
Arnold, take a look. The monsters are covered in wounds. Maybe they're running from him.
Orcs weren't completely stupid, but they were also savage and foolhardy. Such an immense pack of them wouldn't choose to run from just anything. This made clearing orcs out of their forts difficult. But that fact only lent further credence to Ace's suggestion. Arnold knew better than anyone that a level 8 hunter couldn't be understood through the lens of common sense. He also knew that powerful hunters saving towns was a regular occurrence.
That man, what did he do? How did he chase them from their fort? And if he did that, then why didn't he also kill them all? Chasing them out was preferable to fighting them in their fort, but a rampant orc pack posed a danger to travelers.
There was no time to think about it any further. The magus let loose a volley of fireballs that hit the orcs dead on and sent a dozen of them flying back. But the pack didn't stop. Arnold noticed a broken potion vial. It must have been left by a traveler. He made up his mind, almost as if encouraged by the litter. It was a valuable item he was about to use, but this was no time for hesitation. As the leader, it was his responsibility to take the lead and cut a path open. From his belt, he pulled out a potion that enhanced his powers and gulped it all down. His inside shook, and a warm strength coursed through him around his heart. A sense of tremendous strength calmed his nerves. The orc pack saw Arnold and detected his overwhelming sum of mana material, but they still didn't stop. It almost sounded like an earthquake. Particles of dirt knocked into the air reduced visibility. Arnold tossed the vial aside, stood at the vanguard, and shouted in a thunderous voice as lightning crackled about him.
Very well, you'll see that it isn't the 1,000 tricks, but me, the crashing lightning, who you should fear.
You!
Arnold held his sword above his head and blocked a sudden attack. The stench of a monster came over him, murderous, bloodshot. Golden eyes looked at him up close. The lightning enveloping his blade seared the monster's body, but it didn't budge an inch. It was an orc, an unusual one covered in black armor. It towered over the average orc. Its black skin was covered in scars, and its left eye was gone. The large sword it gripped was crude but well maintained, and it was clearly no common weapon if it withstood a hit from the crashing lightning. But what truly separated this one from other orcs was the glint of intelligence in its eyes. It was exceptional, an outlier, a monster that naturally surpassed the rest of its kind. Each of its attacks had weight, its superb strength, making it clear that an average hunter couldn't hope to cross blades with it. Bold enough to face a level 7 hunter and the strength to back it up. No doubt this was the boss of the pack. Faced with such a strong foe, Arnold mustered his strength and swung his sword. If he defeated the boss, maybe the pack would come to a stop? No, they were clearly out of control. The crush of orcs and monsters were intercepted by the other hunters. The black-furred orc took a big step back and screamed, sending spit everywhere. Its speech was fragmented, but its intense feelings were clear enough.
This scent, fear, animosity. This scent won't stop. Treacherous, strange potion. This is the way of humans.
What was he talking about? Doubts floated through the back of Arnold's mind, but he was in no position to be getting his facts straight. Before him was a monster who had attacked him. His only choice was to respond in kind. He blocked another strike. Again and again they clashed, and Arnold confirmed his suspicions. Before him was an orc, unlike any other, but he was the stronger of the two, if only by a small margin. He had the superior weapon, physical strength, and mana material. With the potion enhancing him, there was no way he could lose. The orc's face twisted with shock. It had probably never fought someone so strong, someone better than it. The orc jumped back. Arnold immediately followed up with another attack. Lightning enveloped his sword and shot forward. Unperturbed by the attack, the orc began to move. The lightning would be enough to finish a lesser opponent, but even burnt skin wasn't enough to stop the orc. Its lunge was one made only by those prepared to die, made with the desire to kill your opponent even if it meant sacrificing yourself. Arnold's reaction was delayed. He hadn't expected the orc to make the move it did. The orc wasn't going to swing at him. This wasn't good. Arnold tried to dash for it, but it was clear he wouldn't make it in time. The orc's sword was directed straight at Chloe and the monster she was fending off. She noticed the charging orc, but its strength was on par with that of a high-level hunter. She wouldn't be able to defend against its attack. It was no use. Arnold wasn't going to make it in time. Chloe's eyes opened wide. The large blade came down. It was about to connect with her skull. Tongues of flame falling from the sky swept over the orc. It was almost cataclysmic, more than a downpour of flames poured over the monsters, immolating them all. Clearly, it was no natural occurrence. Fire engulfed the plains, instantly turning the area into an inferno. The monsters' cries of agony echoed throughout the heat and pillars of smoke. Of course, Arnold and his comrades didn't get out unscathed either. One of them must have erected a barrier because they were somewhat shielded from the heat. However, their fight was over.
What's that?
Looking up at the dark night sky, bright blue flames floated about. It was a miracle they were still alive. Even the next day, the events of that night felt like nothing short of a nightmare. Even still, there were certain things expected of a first-rate hunter.
Goodness, it might have been unfortunate for you, but I don't think anyone would argue that it was a stroke of good luck for us. What a coincidence it was that a level 7 hunter happened to be visiting.
Arnold agreed, though he didn't show it on his face. Within the center of the town was its town hall, and there in a room for special guests was Arnold and his party. The mayor and his subordinates all wore shining expressions, the exact opposite of those on the hunters. They had survived 2 successive journeys through hell, and their fatigue was more than they could hide from view. Scorching Whirlwind was the less experienced of the 2 parties, and over half their members were fast asleep. Chloe had declined to attend as well. Arnold leaned back on a luxurious sofa.
Defeating a pack of orcs with so few allies at your side, you live up to your level. I hear you once slew a dragon in Nebula Noobs, but you're a hero to this town as well.
Mr. Mayor, may I remind you that it was more than just orcs. Eyes.
Ah, that's right.
The hunters had already changed out of their blood-stained garments and had their wounds treated. However, within Arnold, there was still a boiling rage, a fighting spirit. The mayor was oblivious to it, but the other hunters could see in his eyes that Arnold was ready to explode at any minute. First-rate hunters excelled at many things, and one of those was control over their emotions. But every time he remembered what happened at the gates, his anger came close to getting the better of him. In moments of weakness, he felt the urge to abandon everything and continue his pursuit, but his party members were wounded, and he couldn't just abandon Chloe, Ruta, and Scorching Whirlwind.
I hear a fire elemental appeared.
The mayor was right. One had appeared. Arnold closed his eyes and he remembered it clearly, the incandescent flames burning in the heavens. As they had been locked in a brutal fight against orcs and other monsters, an elemental appeared. It was of comparable strength to the one they'd fought the day prior. It was a fire elemental, as opposed to a lightning one, but that made little difference. If this was a coincidence, then Arnold was probably experiencing the worst luck of his life. The only thing he could consider fortunate was that Chloe had survived. The bright elemental had playfully spread out a blanket of flames over the orcs and hunters and then simply flew off. If it wanted to, a high elemental could cause destruction surpassing what even a first-rate magus was capable of. If it had continued attacking, then the hunters would have all been turned to ashes along with the monsters. Even if Arnold had survived, it was extraordinarily likely that many more would have perished. The road and its surroundings had been turned into a blaze. Anyone traveling the road would come across the shocking sight of a charred land buried under a pile of monsters' corpses. A grimace formed on A's face. He was likely remembering the battle.
What a joke. I don't know much about this land, but are elementals that common? We've never run into 2 in such a short span.
Oh, no, not that the elementals of Zebrudia can only be found deep in the wilderness. If not that, then being commanded by a magus. I can't recall ever seeing one so close to somewhere so...
Okay, I understand. If they were such a common sight, then there'd be no trade out here, right, Arnold?
Arnold nodded, but his thoughts had already moved on to other matters. He was preoccupied with considering how he might take revenge on the 1,000 Tricks. The sequence of events and the words of the orcs made it clear that he had set the monsters upon Arnold and his companions. It had ended without tragedy, but what he had done was still against the ethics of hunters. Even if it wasn't, staying quiet would sully the name Crashing Lightning.
Whatever the case, the orcs threatening the town are gone and the damage was kept to a minimum. It's hardly a sufficient thanks, but we as a town would like to extend our gratitude. Of course, we can offer some reward.
No, we'll be leaving immediately.
The mayor's eyes bulged. It wasn't every day you received the collective gratitude of a town as large as Gula. This was also a chance to spread the good name of Falling Fog and Scorching Whirlwind. Normally, Arnold would have gladly accepted the offer, but the stifled shadow's provocation had made him far too agitated to enjoy such an occasion. More than that, however, the 1,000 tricks had seen them covered in wounds. Keeping one's body in top form was fundamental to treasure hunting. Even someone as far-sighted as the 1,000 tricks wouldn't expect them to continue pursuing him. In other words, he would be getting complacent. Arnold's top priority was to make him regret looking down on falling fog. The 1,000 tricks wasn't traveling on foot, but he could leave now and still catch up. No, he had to leave now if he wanted to catch up. Even if the 1,000 tricks didn't cover his tracks, the more time he was given, the more his lead would grow.
Apologies, but I have something I need to do. I can't stay long.
The bewildered mayor's eyes bulged. He looked at Arnold, who was scowling and only just managing to keep his anger in check.
I understand. As a level 7 hunter, you must not have much time to rest. Are you perhaps in the middle of a quest?
Hey, Arnold. Giving chase to those guys isn't gonna be easy in our current condition. We need to rest. 3 of us nearly died back there. We're all out of consumables and our equipment's beat up. Even our better-off members are still exhausted. Chloe, Ruda, everyone in Scorching Whirlwind are also at their limit.
Though they had managed to scrape by, being attacked by a horde of monsters while carrying lingering fatigue from Elin had done a number on them. The carriage they had purchased shortly after arriving in the capital was almost beyond repair. Their horses had been killed, and their weapons and armor were badly damaged. They were barely in any condition to be traveling, much less fighting powerful foes. The same went for Chloe and Scorching Whirlwind. It was something of a miracle that they had even managed to walk the rest of the way to Gula.
Allow us to assist you in any way we can. If there's something you need, then we can arrange for it.
Resupplying consumables and preparing a carriage might have been possible, but full maintenance of their gear would be hard in a town of this size and would take time. The stopgap measures they took back in Elan wouldn't be sufficient here. On a scale, Arnold weighed the lives of his comrades against their injuries, his pride, and his future. After a few moments of silence, he clicked his tongue and turned around.
Damn it! Do what you can with Tuno one day. Start resupplying immediately, get plenty of consumables and a large carriage. And better horses too. We'll finish this soon.
No matter where the 1,000 tricks had run off to, Arnold was certain he would catch him and get his payback for everything that had happened so far. Even after looking Arnold in the eye, the 1,000 tricks had turned away indifferently. Amid that crowd, the stifled Shadow had yelled humiliating things at them. Just remembering the sight of his nemesis caused Arnold to clench his teeth. From the top of the carriage, I heard a low, slightly garbled voice.
It appears we have lost them. I do not detect any pursuers. We are traveling on the same road as they were, so I think they might catch up to us.
They must not have been used to speaking politely, because they sounded awkward. Still, I breathed a sigh of relief. Next to me, Liz folded her legs and smiled with genuine amusement.
Did you cry, baby? His face was totally red. He's just a level 7 from the countryside and I put him in his place.
I wished she would give me a break. If she wanted to start fights, that was her business. But for reasons beyond me, I was always held responsible. This was a level 7. She was antagonizing. A level 7 that was higher than her. This was someone I couldn't hold a candle to, as I was, in practice, a level 1 hunter. There was no level 0. Quit trying to start things. You shouldn't be doing this even if it was somehow my fault that they ended up fighting a pack of orcs, and it's not my fault.
Quite right, Krai. It wasn't your fault. It was thanks to you.
It's not my fault, nor is it thanks to me. It's their bad luck and their responsibility, just like my bad luck is my responsibility. I had no allies in this argument. If there was one, it was Tino, and she was completely wiped out at the moment. Do you think they'll come after us?
I imagine they will. If they don't, then they're lacking something vital to a hunter.
I agreed with that. A good hunter was like a good hunting dog. Once they had a target, they would chase it forever and not give up even after a setback. Some really obnoxious ones were on my tail. I wondered how Artie had resolved things with them back at the cafe. It seemed possible that they might keep chasing me even if Liz or Citri gave them a beating. If that was the case, then it would be fastest to kill them, but that was the one thing I wanted to avoid. That would mean my end not just as a hunter but also as a human being. I couldn't tell why, but Citri wore a bright smile even though she fully understood the situation we were in.
However, they seemed quite exhausted. It doesn't seem likely they'll immediately continue to pursue us.
She was right. If they had immediately come after us, then they would have caught us before we reached our carriage. I was able to calm down a bit. Outside our carriage, Drink and Killiam were running along with us. Hunters needed to make thorough preparations before doing anything, and some members of their group were injured. In those conditions, I didn't think they would try to take on Liz. Furthermore, I didn't see how they could know where we were headed. The only people who knew our destination were in the carriage with me, and we had been hiding our identities with fake, real IDs. Perhaps I should have also hidden my face with mirage form. We were in a carriage, which meant our wheels would leave tracks. But this was a road. There were plenty of carriage tracks. Liz stretched out her legs and swung them back and forth as she pursed her lips.
I'm bored. Let's play freeze tag.
I wish I could have frozen you back there. Arnold looked like he wanted to crush my head like a fruit. I'm certain of it. Tino's head wavered side to side as she looked at me through swollen eyes. She was at her limit. I steeled my resolve. It didn't seem at all possible that we might be caught, but I decided to take what cautions I could. I unfolded the map. I had initially planned to head along safe roads and pass through multiple towns on the way to Night Palace. After all, I wasn't in a rush, and I considered safety to be a top priority. However, if we were being pursued, then we would have to change our route. Even if it would be hard for our pursuers to catch us, it was still possible as long as we simply stuck to the road. So I decided we would take a shortcut. Leaving the road would increase our chances of running into monsters. But we had Liz, Citri, Drink, Killiam, and Citri's hired hands with us. Dealing with monsters seemed better than worrying about a high-level hunter. Damn it, I wish Ark could have come along. That dandy is never around when I need him. Maybe he doesn't like me. What was the point of being the strongest in the capital if he couldn't help me? My grumbling caused Ark's self-proclaimed rival Liz to puff up her cheeks, making her look more childish than usual.
What? Am I not good enough for you, crybaby? If I'm not, then just say so. You know I love you.
No, you're fine. Yeah, you're plenty strong. All right, time to change our course. We're no longer sticking to the road. Liz's eyes glimmered, and she leaned forward with a wide grin. You'll see, Arnold. I'm going to enjoy my vacation no matter what. I'll show you. I can flee even better than a level 8, probably.
Is he serious? Sitting in the driver's seat, she received orders that made her momentarily doubt her ears. Every order she had received so far had been benign. They hadn't run into any particularly strong monsters, and, with the exception of the first day, the weather had been good. The incident of Drink running away had been trying, but the chimer ended up coming back around dawn, albeit covered in blood. It was a lot better than the sort of treatment she expected when the collar had been put on her.
Roads were generally safe as monsters tended to keep their distance from them. They also had the fearsome Chimera at their side. On the rare occasion she did spot a monster, they didn't come any closer. But to leave the road would drastically increase the potential danger.
But the Gallus Mountains are teeming with, your Chimera is strong, but it's too dangerous for us to enter those mountains with so few people.
A window opened, and a smiling girl poked her head out.
And what of it?
Her flawless porcelain skin and fine features might have made her a target for Black and her companions under different circumstances, but now that smile looked demonic. The Galust mountain range ran across the northern regions of the Empire. They weren't terribly steep, but there were ley lines running through the mountains and outside of treasure vaults, the local monsters were some of the strongest in Zeebrudia. A forest spread out from the foothills of the range, and it was said to be inhabited by monsters not found anywhere else.
There is a path, though only in the barest sense of the word. The Gallust Mountains aren't much compared to some of the treasure vaults we've cleared in the past. If we're quick to dispatch the monsters, then this will be a nice shortcut. And besides, we have done this before.
A short cut? Unbelievable. Black opened up her map and looked at it with eyes wide as saucers. Crossing the mountains would indeed be a shortcut. Leaving the safety of the road and passing through the forest, and then the mountains would shave a day or two off their trip. But you might also say it would only shave off a day or two. Travelers normally opted not to pass through the Gallust Mountains. Hunters strong enough to fight their way through also avoided the mountains. The risk was too high, and the benefits too low. Black, White, and Gray were confident in their strength, and it was possible they could make it through, but they still preferred to avoid these mountains at all costs.
What's our destination? Our ultimate destination?
They didn't even know where they were headed. Insofar, they had simply been told to follow the road and had been given the name of the occasional town.
Do you have a need to know? Please just go. This is what was decided by Krai, by the 1,000 tricks.
They went here?
Correct. I checked all the ledgers and I didn't find the names you requested.
Every entry to departure in every city in Zebrudia was recorded in a ledger. If someone had entered or left a city, then it was reasonable to assume their name had been written down, and Arnold had seen the 1,000 tricks with his own eyes. It didn't make any sense.
If a high-level hunter had entered our town, we would have requested their aid. In a state of emergency, we wouldn't have let them pass without at least trying to enlist them.
I understand.
One of the roles of the soldiers stationed at a municipality's gates was to pick out combat-capable entrants. They would have noticed a high-level hunter passing through. While Krai Andrey regularly disguised himself as a civilian, the other members of his party did not. If they hadn't been stopped at the gates, then it meant the 1,000 Tricks was intentionally hiding his identity, and apparently even using a fake ID.
Just what in the world are you up to, Krai?
Faking one's identity was a violation of Imperial law. Becoming a level 8 hunter came with special privileges, and he would likely not be punished so long as he had a good reason for his actions. However, that still didn't make it laudable behavior. Initially, she was just supposed to accompany the 1,000 Tricks and keep an eye on his progress. Yet somehow things had ended up like this. She let out a deep sigh. That battle had been like a scene out of hell. Though she had once aspired to be a hunter, she ended up becoming an employee of the Explorers Association. For someone like her, such a battle was a first. She was supposed to have been protected, but the situation hadn't allowed it. Instead, she had drawn her sword and fought for her life, slaying many monsters in the process. But then death came for her. The pitch-black monster was more than just a higher orc. When that blade was swung at her, she was certain she was going to meet her end. It was a miracle that such a doom had been avoided. Just remembering that moment caused a shiver to run down her spine. Arnold hadn't made it in time to save her. If it weren't for the fire elemental, then she would have perished. The fire elemental had been blue, an indicator that it was exceptionally strong. Just like their lightning counterparts, the fire elementals were elusive beings, and very few people in Zebrudia could command one. The only such person that came to mind for Chloe was the Abyssal Inferno, the clan master of Hidden Curse, and one of the 3 level 8s in the capital. However, she was supposed to be in the capital, and Chloe hadn't seen any evidence of her nearby. Arnold had said it was a miracle that nobody had died, but Chloe wasn't so sure. She had seen the elemental roast both the orc pack and falling fog. She and Scorching Whirlwind hadn't even been targeted. It might have been just a coincidence, but if so, it was a coincidence that had saved them from some severe burns. She didn't know why or for what purpose they might have been spared. Of course, she also had no evidence. Neither did she have evidence to suggest what chased the orcs out of their fort, why the monsters ran towards them, or who sent the fire elemental their way. Nothing. All she had were facts with no clear meaning. She didn't know if she should defend the 1,000 Tricks or join the Crashing Lightning in his quest for revenge. In the inn, everyone in Scorching Whirlwind was completely exhausted. That was what happened when you managed to barely avoid being annihilated. Gilbert and Ruda weren't as bad off as the rest, but deep fatigue still showed on their faces.
You've got to be kidding me. Does Tino go through stuff like this every time? White Wolf's den was bad, but this...
They didn't even have the energy to be angry. That was perfectly reasonable. That battle wasn't something most intermediate hunters could handle. It was only because the other hunters had eased her burden that Chloe could still move. But they couldn't split up here. Arnold still planned to go after Krai, and she hadn't completed her objective yet. It seemed they would have to stick together a bit longer. After giving it all some thought, she forced a smile onto her face and entered the room. Treasure hunters sure had it rough. Some places are so dangerous you should avoid entering them at all costs. Chief among these are mountains and forests, not under any state's jurisdiction. At least, they are for normal travelers. Adventuresome treasure hunters tend to forget this. Areas crossed by ley lines, the veins through which mana material flows, are especially abundant in valuable resources. Since they're populated by powerful monsters and phantoms, items recovered from those regions tend to go for high prices. The Galist mountain range in the northern reaches of the Empire was one of those dangerous places that humans tended to steer clear of. The almost non-existent road was ancient and had not been maintained for a long time. It was barely wide enough for a single carriage to pass through. Plus, even inside the carriage I could tell just how fraught the terrain was. It must have been almost completely unused. While being rocked side to side, I averted my mind from reality by pondering the idea that this trail might one day fade away just as everything does.
Hey, Crybaby, what should I say to those guys next time? What'll really piss them off? What'll make them fly at us with rage? Let's think about it.
Oh, that's right, Krai. I hear a roving ogre lives in the Galist Mountains. It's not much more than a rumor, though. Not many have encountered one and lived to tell about it after all. However, those rumors might be why so few pass through here.
I might also mention the reason treasure hunters tended to forget the dangers of forests and mountains. They were always clearing treasure vaults, some of the most treacherous places in existence. I suppose monsters which left behind profitable meat when killed were preferable to phantoms, which manifested almost without end and left nothing behind. It was sound reasoning, but I thought both warranted caution. I didn't think I'd be able to get through to Liz, so I looked at Citri and tried to pivot the subject from her terrifying ideas. Hey, are we gonna be all right?
We will. I think. We're not very far into the forest, you see. Is there something concerning you?
Ha, no. If you think we're fine, then that's enough.
This is also a good opportunity for Drink's combat training. I was quite uncertain when to start. At the clan house, I was able to let it practice against humans, but I struggled to find a good chance for it to fight monsters. Orcs are cowardly and wouldn't be of any use, but the aggressive monsters of the Galist Mountains are a perfect fit.
Ah, so that blood that was orc blood?
It was Drink just loves the flesh of orcs. Having a full stomach seems to have put it in a very good mood.
Apparently, when we met up with the carriage and found Drink and Killiam covered in blood, it was because they had just been eating orcs. I wondered if perhaps they had attacked the orc pack that had fled their fort. Not everyone could do that and come back in one piece. We sure are running into a lot of monsters. Funny to think we didn't run into any on the way here. It's not like I want to stop Drink from training, but isn't this a bit too many? The only person who might share this sentiment was Tino, and she was looking down and clutching her knees. She wouldn't face me, and her only movements were from the vibrations of the carriage. The constant screams and sounds of battle couldn't have been good for her peace of mind. It was all I could do to just pretend to be calm. The Galist Mountains seemed to have far more monsters than I had imagined. On top of that, they were vicious monsters who saw Drink and still considered us prey.
There are far more monsters than I had anticipated. Perhaps this is a sign that something much stronger might appear.
You sure seem happy about that. The carriage would occasionally come to a sudden stop, and judging from the screams outside, it seemed we didn't have enough guards out there. I had anticipated monster attacks, maybe not this many, but I had still considered the possibility. What I hadn't expected was, I looked at Liz rolling around and resting her cheek against my knees. I looked at Citri, her eyes glimmering. I looked at Tino clutching her knees and off in her own world. How come you three aren't helping? I had chosen the mountain route because I didn't think monsters would be a problem. After all, we had not only Drink, Killiam, and Citri's hired hands, but also Liz, Citri, and Tino. Usually, Liz would be itching to go out into the fray. I was about to ask them when they planned to go out and fight, but I lost my chance. The carriage shook violently, and I heard roars and loud cursing. Even if we were their clients, I thought Black, White, and Gray were being treated a bit harshly. Perhaps the terms of their contract hadn't been black and white enough? I briefly hesitated before summoning my courage and asking Citri a question. Hey, Citri, about what's going on outside.
Oh, yes. Drink's combat training and meals are being conducted alongside my capability tests for those three. It's incredibly efficient. I've been meaning to find out how well Killiam and Drink operate in tandem. You always come through, Krai.
She seemed bashful as she gave her bizarre reply. Maybe that was the correct attitude for an alchemist to take, and I knew they cherished efficiency, but I still thought it was a bit much. Drink and Killiam would probably be fine, but I didn't think her hired helpers would be. I could bear losing Killiam, but what about if your hired hands die?
Yeah.
Sure, death and hunters were never far apart, but that didn't mean this was a good idea. Confused, Citri thought for a few seconds. She put a finger to her lip and tilted her head.
I'll search for more.
I don't think you understood the question.
Huh? Forgive me. Are you perhaps trying to suggest there's another use for them?
What peculiar sensibilities she had. I averted my gaze and looked at Liz, who was still lying around the carriage. Her clear pink eyes looked at me questioningly. She was wearing her usual combat gear, apex roots, equipped to her dangling legs.
What you looking at? Ah, would you like to rub my belly? Here!
She ran a finger along her exposed midriff, but I refused to play along. I got straight to the point. Liz, don't you want to fight?
Of course I do. Doing nothing like this makes me feel like I'll go soft.
Then, why? Still lying down, Liz lifted her head with a smile and rested it in my lap.
But I can bear it. You banned violence on this trip, right? Look how great I'm doing. Am I great? Aren't I great?
Oh, right. I finally remembered what I had said a few days ago. I had indeed prohibited violence in training, but that was so we could have a fun vacation. I had invited Liz and the others because I wanted them to have a good time. But I also wanted them as protection. I had my reservations, but at this rate, black, white, and gray were going to die. I had to say it. The restrictions don't apply to fighting monsters.
Huh?
When I banned violence, I meant violence against humans. Really, I had just wanted to prevent them from getting in any scuffles. I had just been trying to stop them from picking any fights with any civilians, hunters, or apprentices. Sure, I wanted them to avoid doing dangerous things at all costs. However, it seemed counterproductive to let them laze about the carriage and leave the defense to a few hired helpers who were, most likely, at a disadvantage. Besides, Liz, you provoked Arnold back there, remember? That was verbal violence. Liz's eyes widened. Even Citri looked caught off guard. An unusual expression for her. Maybe it was my fault for not being clear enough, but it only makes sense Who? Did Liz think I was telling her not to resist even if monsters attacked her? No way. Does she think I'm some sort of sicko? Tino looked up and stared at me. I put aside my self-recriminations and spoke in a hard-boiled voice. Exterminating monsters isn't violence, it's getting rid of what's in the way. Isn't that right? The carriage rocked wildly, almost as if to make my point.
I love you, crybaby. Be back in a bit.
She must have really been holding it in. She flew out the door, forgetting to bring Tino along. The force of her exit caused the carriage to screech across the ground. Following that was a litany of shouting, just as rough as the preceding vulgarities.
Hey, you dumbass pissants! Get back! This isn't goddamn amateur hour! Just protect the horses!
I'm sorry, Krai. Lizzie, she's, had a lot of stress pent up.
The sounds outside took on a whole new level of intensity. I also heard screams from Citri's hired hands. Liz must have really been going all out. Well, I was the one who gave her that weird order.
May I also step outside? I'd like to check on Drink's growth and perhaps gather ingredients. There are some rare resources I can't gather when you're around.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead. Citri dipped her head and sprang out the door with just as much energy as Liz. I wondered just what sort of material she couldn't gather when I was around. I figured things would quiet down soon enough. I let out a yawn and my eyes met Tino's.
Master, is this where the real battle begins?
No, there's no real battle or anything. Right, Tino? Maybe you should get some sleep. You might need it.
All right.
I wondered if she would really be able to rest like that. The battle intensified, yet we were entirely safe in the carriage. I heard less of black, white, and gray, and heard more of Liz's roars and Citri's orders. It could have been my imagination, but the carriage seemed to speed up. The next time we stopped, it was at a fork, splitting the road to the left and right. One way led to a rough stretch that could only generously be called a path. The other way was overgrown with weeds, but seemed to be receiving some degree of maintenance.
Krai, which way shall we go?
It was always my job to make the decisions. I poked my head out, took a look, and pointed to the relatively clean one. Of course I did. I wasn't going to pick the rough path. That one had fallen trees, which we would have to clear out of the way. Citri gave me a pure smile and directed her helpers. We continued down the lonesome path. If it weren't for the monsters, the abundant trees and fresh scent of nature would have been healing for me after spending so much time in the capital. Unfortunately, it was dangerous, so I couldn't hold my head out the window. I had my safety rings, but I still wasn't interested in being attacked out of the blue. It seemed I had managed to make the right decision for once, as the rate of monster appearances had dropped immensely. Not that I cared why, but I thought they were possibly scared of Liz. Citri came back inside the carriage. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement, and she proudly held up a black fang. It was roughly 30 centimeters and covered in blood and bits of flesh.
Look, Krai, It's the fang of a general class troll. Even in the Great Gallus Mountains, it's hard to find such a valuable specimen. Those trolls are violent and troublesome even for hunters, so you can almost never find these on the market. They should normally be deep in the woods, but this one came to us. It was an old one, but still, what luck. You can boil it, cook it, grind it down. It's a superb find.
Trolls were a sapien monster, just like goblins and orcs. They were one of the stronger varieties of sapiens, as they boasted exceptional strength, size, toughness, and regenerative powers. I hadn't known that they were in the Gallus Mountains, but it wasn't too surprising since trolls lived in forests, and if we met a troll, we were unlikely to meet any other travelers. Tino opened her eyes slightly and recoiled at the sight of the fang, or maybe it was at Citri's excitement. Citri gingerly placed the fang in a leather bag and came up to me. She was smiling ear to ear, just like she was on vacation.
So, Krai, what might we find at the end of this path?
Huh?
No, don't tell me. I've got an idea. If it's smart enough to make a fake path as part of a trap, it must be a fairly advanced monster. The number of monsters has fallen, so I'd hazard that its territory is quite large.
Huh? What? What's she talking about? This is all news to me, she said. Fake? This path is fake? Tell me these things sooner. I thought this path was well off for one that looked untraveled.
However, it tried to hide the other paths simply with fallen trees and some debris. And this path is quite neat, so I don't imagine it's too smart. Perhaps less than a goblin? And this wasn't here when we first headed to Night Palace, so it was probably hastily thrown up after we passed by.
Less than a goblin? Then what does that make me if I completely fell for its trick? And if it wasn't here the first time you passed through, then say something. Don't try to protect my feelings. Citri's smile was genuine. It didn't seem like she was making fun of me. Overall, I would have preferred it if she were. Well then, I think it's time to turn around and take the other path.
As you wish. Black, put us in reverse. Carriages can't go in reverse. It's hard to turn around like this, what you're here for.
Criticize me or something. Just don't believe me. The carriage came to a stop. Once I heard someone outside give the okay, and I stepped onto the ground for the first time in hours. The sun was setting, and the moon shimmered in the cloudless red sky. I heard a river nearby. It seemed this was where we would be resting. It seemed a good thing we had turned around since we hadn't met the big monster Citri had been anticipating, but turning around also meant we didn't make as much progress as we had planned. Crossing the mountains after sunset would be suicide. Even Citri wouldn't insist we attempt it. We were at a clearing with just enough space for a carriage and few parties to stop and rest. It seemed likely that many travelers had once used this as a stopping point while crossing the Gallus Mountains. Drink carefully sniffed the ground. Citri began to unload our bags and gave me a blossoming smile even though I hadn't done anything but sit in the carriage. Next to her, Liz stretched her arms with satisfaction.
Fine work out there, Krai. That was a very good experience.
That was worth the wait! Last time we barely ran into any monsters. You're the best, crybaby.
Lizzie, that was because we had Ansem with us last time.
Yeah, he really sticks out. And if any monsters did show up, then Luke would take them on.
Liz was in high spirits for someone who had just been locked in nonstop combat. Meanwhile, Citri's 3 hired hands were all sitting on the ground looking close to death. Their heads were hung so I couldn't see their faces, but their armor was splattered with blood and their muscular limbs had gone limp. The contrast between them and the Smart Sisters was startling. When we first became hunters, these sorts of accidents, powerful monsters appearing, natural disasters, etc., would leave them exhausted. I wondered when they just stopped minding them altogether. And then there was me. I didn't know if I should be thankful for such strong friends or feel left behind.
Oh, right, Lizzie, you were far too violent. Don't make such a mess. It ruins the path for the next people who come along.
I don't care about that. The next people to come will just be Arnold and his gang, won't they? So it doesn't matter. That's why Krai Baby lifted the ban on combat, right?
No, that wasn't quite it. It wasn't even that likely that they would succeed in catching up to us. It seemed much more likely to me that they would just wait for us at the capital, which was all the more reason I needed to have the rest of Grieving Souls with me when I came back. Even while chatting with us, Citri's hands kept busy. She started a fire, fed the tired horses, and set up camp. Her fluid movements showed that she did these same chores regularly. Liz wasn't screwing around either. She was patrolling the perimeter while whistling to herself. Citri didn't care for people butting into her work anyway. When we used to travel as a party, Citri and Lucia would set up camp while Liz, Luke, and Sam would patrol or hunt for food. It was my job to check in with everyone to see how they were, which is to say I didn't do anything.
Krai, where's T?
Asleep. She seemed really tired, so let's let her get a bit of shut-eye. I didn't think she'd be able to stay awake much longer. She had been nodding off occasionally, and we didn't need any more people to be on guard, so this seemed a good time for her to rest. She was tossing and turning in her sleep, but there wasn't much I could do to help with that.
If you say so, cry, baby.
Surprisingly, even she could show compassion.
Now then, with Krai joining us for the first time in a while, I have all the more reason to prepare something revitalizing. I've gotten my hands on plenty of great ingredients.
You're right. It's been so long since we've eaten together like this. Until Eliza joined us, Citri was the only grieving soul who could cook, and her skills were top-notch. At first, I expected it might take some time for her to become any good, but she developed her skills in the blink of an eye. The spices she used were ones she got at the market, and the other ingredients were mostly from animals and vegetables that happened to be nearby. Yet her food somehow seemed to always agree with me. I hadn't eaten her cooking in some time, and just the chance to feast on it might have been enough to make this trip worth it. I found myself a bit moved. I smiled and let out a sigh. Before we formed a clan, back when we traveled together as a party, I always felt like I was going to die from the stress of monsters, harsh environments, and treasure vaults. But I wouldn't say I only had bad memories of that time. Sure, I was talentless. So much that Evolve Greed rejected me, but back then Krai Andrey was a hunter. This trip made me remember those adventures like they were yesterday. My trip down memory lane was interrupted when I noticed Citri looking at me. I'll go grab some water, since I'm just standing around anyways.
Oh, please do.
Cry, baby, let me go with you. There might be fish.
After following the scent of water for a few minutes, we came to a large river. Sources of water were important to humans, animals, and monsters. Except for phantoms, nothing could survive without it.
Woo! It's so pretty. Stuff like this is the best part of being a hunter.
We must have picked the right time, because there weren't any monsters nearby. The river was a calm one, and the moon reflected off its dark surface. Does this look good?
Yeah, and I can see plenty of fish.
Just because it looked clean didn't mean it was necessarily fine to drink. Hunters with plenty of mana material had strong stomachs, but I was no such hunter. Liz didn't hesitate to step in. The water should have been cold, but hunters weren't easily bothered by these things.
It's so cold. I've still got some blood on me. Maybe I'll wash it off.
Right in front of me, she began to undress. She tossed her gauntlets onto the riverbank and reached around to her back. She took off her armor, which only covered the top of her torso to begin with, her belt, and her shorts. The moonlight shined on her fine skin. Though I could only see her back, all that remained on her was her thin, black underwear. I wished she had shown a bit more hesitation about undressing. Even if she was a hunter, she was still a girl, and I thought she could be a bit more discreet. Her fingers made their way to the hook on her back and then stopped. I regained my self-control and chided her. Liz, you shouldn't do that.
What's the matter? We're comrades, aren't we?
Sure, I had known Liz since we were young, but that didn't mean rules of decency didn't apply between us. If she only wanted to wash off the blood, then she didn't need to undress any further, and I wanted to get water, not watch her strip. I was puzzling over how to stop her, but she suddenly looked over at me.
Still, maybe I will stop for now. This is a bit embarrassing and we haven't been on an adventure together in so long.
With a bashful and slightly alluring expression, she reached up and undid her ponytail, letting her pink hair fall across her back. Without waiting another moment, she jumped into the river. It seemed the river wasn't that deep as she was able to stand with the water just up to her chest.
Are you gonna join me?
No. I need to get this water.
Oh, darn. Well, I'm gonna catch some.
She quickly dived into the water, her legs briefly kicking the air. Even at times like this, she kept apex roots on. Maybe she has grown up a bit. With feelings I wasn't sure how to describe, I began to fill Citri's canteen with water. I felt indebted to them. When operating as a party, one person's mistake could decide the fate of everyone. Incompetency was a sin and I was incompetency made manifest. But the rest of the party never held that against me. When I quit adventuring, they never pressed me for a reason as to why. That allowed me to look back on those days as fun, if only just barely. Liz might seem inconsiderate, but even she was thinking of me. I couldn't thank her enough.
It's so much more fun when you're around. I'm glad you came.
We were enjoying a brief respite. She was sitting on the riverbank and I was combing her plentiful hair with my fingers. Her damp locks had a strange weight to them, but they were without any damage in spite of her regular battles. She shivered every time my fingertips pressed against her scalp. It looks all right. It looks like you got the blood out.
Thanks. Giving off a funny smell might cause me to screw up when it counts.
She sounded awfully relaxed when she said that. We had completed what we came to do, but it felt like a waste to head back immediately. Liz and I weren't lovers or anything, but she wasn't saying anything about returning, and it was nice to just sit around from time to time. There was nothing uncomfortable about our silence, and I wasn't getting tired of looking at the unspoiled natural beauty around us. I was letting my gaze fall on the water when Liz abruptly spoke up.
Hey, crybaby! I'm gonna become a powerful hunter.
I know. I thought she was already plenty powerful, but I didn't doubt the determination in her voice. She was powerful, humble, dedicated, and beautiful. She was feared in the capital, but she also had a number of fans. Something about her grabbed people's hearts and made her stand out from the rest. It was something all champions had, and therefore something I would never have. I knew I wasn't fit to be a hunter, but I was still jealous of Liz's straightforward dedication.
And I'm definitely gonna make a hunter out of Tino. You made her my apprentice, so just watch.
I believe in you. You've got my full support. Of course, there was almost nothing I could do to help, but I was glad to see Liz had grown. She stood up and turned towards me, putting her underwear-clad figure right in front of me. I looked away reflexively, but she simply smiled.
Will you stay with me forever?
Of course, I felt indebted. I was certain I was one of the reasons for the explosive growth of her and the rest of our friends. If I had talents like they did, then maybe they would have grown up a bit more proper. But that guilt wasn't the reason I accepted all their invitations even after I stopped adventuring with them. Even if they were feared in the capital, even if there was an astronomical difference in our strength, they were my precious friends no matter how much time passed. Wearing my usual smile, I was about to give Liz her answer. The forest shook. Liz's bright expression became dark.
Come on, that's some bad timing. We had such a good atmosphere going.
Huh?
It went in the direction of the others, I guess. This thing's really hard to pick up. I gotta train more.
I sat there bewildered. Liz let out a small sigh as she squeezed the water out of her hair and tied it up. She then put her clothes and armor back on. Within a few seconds, the alluring girl had changed into a fearsome hunter. Liz smiled at me, a look brimming with its usual confidence and brilliance. With Liz pulling my hand, we ran through the darkness. She could see in the dark, and I had activated Owl's Eye so visibility was no issue, but the nighttime forest still unsettled me. I probably wouldn't have been able to run through those woods if she hadn't been gripping my hand.
City's noticed it. I think we'll be fine. She's an alchemist after all.
It seemed Citri knew we were being followed by something. Liz had said it was hard to pick up. It must have been something considerable if a thief had trouble detecting it. For what it's worth, I was getting chased all the time. At that very moment, I also had Arnold pursuing me. A hard-boiled line seemed a good way to escape reality. Sure is tough being so popular.
That was cool.
The man who uttered that cool line was currently being pulled along by her, and at risk of tripping at any moment. I wondered if Liz would still like me if I did something so lame. Fast as the wind, we returned to our camp and saw a monster slugfest unfolding before us.
Took you long enough, Lizzie.
Killiam ripped a tree from the ground and hurled it like a javelin. Drink let out a roar and went on the attack. They were both fighting a creature I'd never seen before. It had deep green skin and abnormally long limbs. Horns protruded from multiple spots on its body, which was partially covered by a crude cloth. Its face was unique, but it seemed to be a sort of goblin. Its looks were creepy, but what truly unsettled me was its swift and silent movements. Killiam was strong, it excelled through pure strength and endurance and was the equivalent of at least a level 5 hunter. Drink's lion-like form suggested it was formidable as well, and yet their attacks weren't leaving a scratch on the strange monster. With eerie, slippery movements, it dodged the incoming tree and deflected Drink with a refinement atypical of monsters. All three of Citri's hired hands were cowering by the carriage. Tino had awoken from her sleep, and was already in a combat stance, but seemed unable to find an opening for her to attack. It was too fast for me to even properly follow it with my eyes. I would have completely lost track of it if it weren't for my night vision relic.
What's that?
A roving ogre.
I see. So this is the roving ogre Citri was talking about. Looks like I've got another entry to the list of rare monsters I've encountered.
It would seem this is the monster that made the fake path. I imagine it came after us because we entered its territory, just as Krai calculated.
My calculations suck. Killiam roared, clenched its fists, and charged. However, the difference in reach was too large. Multiple large bruises were left on its gray body. The roving ogre looked at us, and in almost the same instant its long arms shook. It had thrown something. It had thrown a rock. By the time I had realized what was happening, a red burning rock was closing in on my face. But the comet-like projectile stopped before it could hit me, and it wasn't thanks to a safety ring. Liz's slender arm entered my vision, her small hand catching the flaming rock.
Die!
She sent the stone back at the monster at the same speed it had flown at me. Not expecting such a counterattack, the blazing stone hit the roving ogre dead on. It flew backwards, not stopping even after crashing through a few trees. Once again, Liz had displayed absurd strength for a thief. Silence returned. Killiam looked about the vicinity and Drink growled. There seemed to be no sign of retaliation. Liz clapped her hands together, knocking off any dust or dirt.
That barely damaged it. It must be resilient to physical attacks. Explain this, City.
I don't have much to go off of, but I hear it's a cautious and tenacious monster. It's safe to assume it hasn't given up yet. It's most likely retreating into the darkness so it can plan an ambush.
I couldn't tell from where, but I heard the eerie sound of leaves rustling. I couldn't tell if it was just the wind or a creepy monster stalking us. If it was a monster capable of fooling me, I figured it's safe to assume it was reasonably intelligent. And if it was capable of striking so swiftly, we would have to keep an eye out.
Even Killian's attacks were almost entirely without effect. It's probably a revenant-type monster, seeing as physical attacks don't do much to them.
And we don't have Unsir Lucia. Damn it!
Hunters all have their own strengths and weaknesses. Working as a party usually solved this issue, but among us, we had no magus who might be able to dispatch a foe resilient to physical attacks. I had shooting rings, but they wouldn't do much. Liz, Citri, and Tino all looked at me. They were expecting me to make a decision. We've repelled it for now. Let's take this opportunity to run for it.
I wish we didn't have to, but it is a troublesome monster. I suppose you're right, Krai.
I guess it's for the best. We can probably take it, but who knows what might happen to T. It's so stealthy, and I promised Krai Baby that we'd turn her into a proper hunter.
Lizzie,
We weren't being paid to come out here. There was no reason for us to take on a monster we weren't suited to handle. On top of that, we weren't surrounded for once. Tino seemed taken aback, but this wasn't a monster we should have been fighting. There was no way she could have overcome the roving ogre, and I needn't say that the heaviest dead weight was me. I was surprised Liz was so willing to fall back, but maybe she was still thinking about our conversation from earlier. Let This Grieving Soul Retire by Tsuki Kaje, cast by Artale Studio. If you are interested in creating your own audiobooks, please check out our website at artale.ai. Now, enjoy the story. A quick retreat was ideal in these situations. Even if traversing mountains at night was a bad idea, we didn't have any better options available to us. They were strong. Sitting atop the verdant branch of a massive tree, the roving ogre contemplated its unexpected intruders. Its body was racked with the scorching pain from the impact of the rock. The injury wasn't going to be fatal, but pain was something it hadn't felt in a long time. No human or other monster in the Galist Mountains had ever proved a challenge for the roving ogre. It was resistant to physical attacks, and it could deftly move its long limbs at speeds nobody had yet been able to keep up with. Even that belligerent troll stayed away from its territory. But that pack of humans, they were different. They would require caution. Even if they were strong foes, the ogre couldn't just let them get away. This wasn't because they had entered its territory, it was because they had caught its eye. Its instincts compelled it to capture and slaughter any prey that it took an interest in. It took pleasure in using its wits to accomplish this. Attacking head-on was no way to go about a hunt. It still believed in its ability to win a direct confrontation, but that simply wasn't its way. Of course, it started by going after the weak ones, but that pack had plenty of strong members. When it hurled a rock at one of them, it wasn't just caught, it was thrown back at a speed that matched the roving ogre's. Its best option would be to look for an opening. The Galist Mountains were vast. A chance to strike was bound to present itself. The whole mountain range was like its own backyard. It knew all the routes across, and it could safely trail its prey by moving from tree to tree. The roving ogre had been one with the shadows atop a tree, but at last, its prey began to move. So did the ogre, leaving only the faintest rustling in its wake. The carriage was shaking violently. Tino hugged her knees.
She felt pathetic. She knew she was still inexperienced. She knew what a wide gap lay between her strength and Lizzie's. Even still, she couldn't accept that it was her faults that caused the party to flee in the face of a monster. Nobody in the carriage spoke to her. Krai was keeping a watchful eye on the window. Knowing that he was probably trying to be considerate of her only made her feel worse. Some obstacles could be overcome with encouragement, others you had to overcome all by yourself. This trial was most likely the latter. That monster was strong. If it was able to prove a match for Killiam, then it was probably too much for Tino to take on solo. She just wasn't suited for it. But she should have summoned every drop of strength in her and fought it. She realized she had been constantly spoiled during this vacation. She hadn't been in any fights, and the only strenuous thing she had done was run around while being struck by lightning. She had been too wary, wondering when she might get attacked and therefore miss the meaning behind the reprieve granted to her. Hunters weren't permitted the chance to come to a stop. Success required that you constantly moved forward. That was how Grieving Souls had become one of the top parties in the capital. Her master had chosen to retreat and Lizzie went along with him. Normally this was unthinkable. It was all Tino's fault. They had seen her fears and her weak spirit. Subconsciously, Tino had believed that she had no need to fight if she was with the smart sisters and the all-powerful 1,000 Tricks. Most people would know that being the weakest meant she should see such an encounter as a learning opportunity.
What's the matter, Tino? Did you get hit back there? It was her master, looking at her with concern. How could she have gotten hit? She had just stood at the ready, only intending to attack. His question was like salt rubbed in a wound. She wanted to say something but kept her lips sealed and just shook her head. Perhaps he had also been sarcastic earlier when he told her she's got a long road ahead. She wished he would scold her in clearer terms. It couldn't be helped. That was a tricky monster.
Intelligent monsters are capable of detecting nanomaterial and therefore often go for the weaker ones first.
Their words of comfort dug into Tino's heart, though that probably wasn't their intention. Especially City, she just tended to speak frankly. Not that it made Tino feel any better.
She had to fight. At the beginning of the vacation, Lizzie had mentioned her getting a shot at redemption. Next time, she had to step forward. She had to show she was worthy of joining Grieving Souls even if it cost her an arm or two. She had to do it while they still had expectations of her.
She heard Lizzie's wild voice atop the carriage.
It looks like we're still being followed, but I don't know where it is.
That's no good. Perhaps I'll throw an explosive potion.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
The roving ogre was terribly persistent. It was hard to believe it hadn't given up after fighting Lizzie. The blast from City's explosive took down nearby trees, but they were still being chased by a pursuer they couldn't even see.
This would be much more manageable if Lucia were here. That would make such a difference.
Can we outrun it?
I can think of a proper solution and a risky one. We can use a scapegoat. Roving ogres are both persistent and ruthless, but they apparently have a habit of playing with their catches. If we offered a scapegoat, we should be able to escape with ease. In fact, I hear that without exception, villages located near roving ogre domains all have a folktale involving a fairy demanding sacrifices.
Citri wanted to throw someone under the bus. This was far beyond anything Tino had expected. She couldn't imagine herself winning against a monster that so greatly surpassed her even if she fought until her last breath. She had summoned the will to fight, but that meant little in the face of reality.
Master, it's too much for me. I'll die.
So, what's the proper solution?
Krai. That was the proper solution.
Krai laughed with her. It must have been the sort of joke only high-level hunters could see the humor in. Tino wasn't laughing at all.
Thinning the herd would be two birds with one stone, wouldn't you say so, T?
Citri looked at Tino with a knowing gaze. Her eyes sparkled with a light that wanted Tino dead. Maybe Citri was still holding a grudge for Tino's date with Krai back in Gula. So what's the risky solution?
Instead of a person, we lure in monsters to act as a scapegoat. I don't think it would be as effective as a human lure, and luck will factor in, so I'd advise against such a plan.
Yup, let's go with that plan. Citri, human life is something to be treasured.
In other words, there's more we can get out of black, white, and gray. I see.
Looking immensely disappointed, Citri once again looked at Tino and carefully pulled out another vial of danger effect, the monster luring potion. The sun began to rise. The mayor and townsfolk of Gula saw Arnold's company off as they departed. Their bodies were still tired, but their mental fatigue was even worse. Their new carriage was much larger than their previous ones, so even someone as big as Arnold could comfortably fit in. The horses were also much stronger. It was a notable upgrade, but it was still uncertain whether or not they would be able to catch up to their quarry.
Better treatment when you hit level 7.
We saved a town in crisis. This much is only natural. If we had more time, we could have received further thanks.
He sounded wistful, but he knew what the life of a hunter could entail. Hunters didn't use fancy carriages. A higher-priced one might be more comfortable, but hunters' carriages were always being damaged, and buying a new one could drive up expenses. As hunters were already spending large sums on potions and weapons, expenses from carriages were a constant source of headaches. With only a day's notice, the town had only been able to procure one carriage. Though it was a large one, it wasn't spacious enough to fit all of them. As Chloe was their client, they couldn't make her walk, so the members of the vanguard took turns walking and riding in the carriage. The members of Scorching Whirlwind were especially tired. Aside from Gilbert, none of their members were yet able to move and were instead piled up in the carriage. Technically, these groups were separate parties. Falling Fog wasn't obligated to let Scorching Whirlwind ride in the carriage while they walked. However, surviving fierce encounters together had created a bond between them. Nobody complained about the arrangement. A didn't mind. He was used to walking. The bigger issue was whether they would catch the 1,000 tricks. With everything that had happened so far, he was on the lookout for trouble, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It seemed a safe assumption that the 1,000 tricks had taken this road. A carriage had left obvious ruts. They were moving at a brisk pace. Gilbert, who had grown used to being with Falling Fog, had a question.
Hey, old man, you killed a dragon, right? How crazy is it to fight a dragon?
Hey, Gilbert. Sorry, he doesn't mean anything by it.
Arnold was no stranger to lively youths who didn't know fear. Gilbert's words were endearing compared to some of the incendiary remarks from the 1,000 tricks. He wasn't so petty or idle as to get angry over some impolite word choices.
Ah, even a normal dragon is pretty bad, but what we fought was no normal dragon. The Thunder Dragon back in Nebulunubes once routed an army of more than 1,000 soldiers. The Lighting Elemental back in Elan and that Orc pack weren't much compared to the Thunder Dragon.
Such a young party had probably never taken on anything comparable to the Elemental or the pack of orcs. Gilbert's expression changed when he heard that a Thunder Dragon was even worse.
Dragons really are something else. One day, I'll become a dragon slayer. Just watch me. I swear on my blade.
You need more than a good blade to slay a dragon. You might get away with it if the dragon can't fly, like an earth dragon or something, but otherwise, you need to bring it down to the ground first.
That's so? Wait, if my blade can't reach it, then what if I was able to jump high enough to reach it?
Sure, that sounds possible, but how are you going to dodge its breath while in the air?
Their defeat of the Thunder Dragon was both the pride and source of confidence of Falling Fog. The dragon's roar, its rage, the blinding flashes of lightning, its burning enmity, A could remember every moment of the battle until the dragon fell. The Lightning Elemental and the Orc pack had been tough, but no foe was tough enough to scare off a party that slew a dragon capable of destroying entire countries. Even if that foe was a higher-ranked hunter, sometimes pride came before anything else. They weren't bad people. They were excellent hunters who were full of confidence and had survived many battles. That was Chloe's evaluation of Falling Fog. At first, she had thought them to be a rowdy bunch, but they had proved to be reliable and had been courteous to the townsfolk. They might have been behaving only because she was present, however. She had seen how Falling Fog treated Scorching Whirlwind like senior look after junior hunters. You really couldn't judge a book by its cover. This, however, made it all the more disheartening that they were at odds with Grieving souls. If the two parties worked together, then some of those difficult quests collecting dust at the Explorers Association might finally get done. But the die was cast. Falling Fog would continue their pursuit in spite of their ordeals and wouldn't stop until they got their closure. When the time came, Chloe would have to stop them, even if it meant putting herself in harm's way. After traveling for a few hours, the carriage came to a stop in the middle of a field dotted by the occasional tree. Chloe stuck her head out the window and saw Arnold and a few others examining tracks left in the road.
Excuse me, has something happened?
These marks, they're diverging from the road. A.
No two ways about it? This is their work.
With a tense expression, A looked off in the direction indicated by the marks. Chloe exited the carriage and took a look for herself. Next to the wheel tracks were markings, arrows drawn into the ground. The very deliberately placed arrow and heart symbols pointed away from the highway. Next to them were wheel ruts that were very recent. If they were heading for the Gladys Earldom, then they could have just kept to the highway. That was what common sense dictated, and it was what Chloe had planned to do. It was what made the tracks so conspicuous the arrow was hardly necessary. The tracks were faint, being mere depressions in the soft grass, but not faint enough to escape a hunter's notice. Chloe looked at the tracks and referenced the map in her head.
The Gallist mountain range. It's teeming with dangerous monsters and is one of the most dangerous places in the Empire. Even high-level hunters avoid it. Some of the monsters out there have bounties on their heads.
Arnold's body shook and he stamped out the mocking heart mark in the ground.
They're inviting us to follow?
If they're crossing the mountains, does that mean they're in a hurry? No.
If their destination was the Gladys Earldom, then crossing the mountains wouldn't save them a significant amount of time. When you accounted for the amount of time spent fighting off monsters, it wasn't even a realistic option for anyone without complete confidence in their strength. Considering the Stifled Shadow's parting words, there was only one possible explanation. These marks were a challenge for Arnold and his companions. If they took the time to draw an arrow, then they were no doubt taunting them. Arnold clenched his teeth and glared off in the direction of the tracks.
If you're not a coward, then come on, come after us! Is that it, Thousand Tricks?
What do? We can't entirely write off the possibility that it's a trap.
He had a point. Considering everything that had happened so far, this could possibly be a trap. But even A didn't seem to believe what he was saying.
Gilbert, tell me this, would that man fear a pack of monsters?
Gilbert seemed to briefly consider the sudden question before answering in a loud voice.
He wouldn't. No way, no one. He wouldn't even draw a weapon before a phantom. Would you fear one, old man?
Arnold didn't plan to stop now, and nothing was going to get in his way. It wouldn't have made any difference no matter how Gilbert answered. He had made his decision.
We're going. We're crossing the mountains.
Daring and audacious. That was what Chloe expected from hunters. The old road leading to the Gallist Mountains was just large enough to accommodate their new carriage. The dense trees flanking the road limited their vision, and they occasionally heard the cries of monsters in the distance. But what took Chloe by surprise was the sheer number of dead monsters. The fresh corpses of a wide range of monsters were scattered about. It was an extraordinary number, and that was before considering that some of the carcasses had likely already been eaten. It wasn't just Chloe. Veterans like A and Arnold also grimaced at the sight.
Did they do all this?
Mountains are dense with monsters, but this is still way too many. What even happened?
Monster carcasses could be sold, and this much would earn a tidy profit. But there was no sign that they had taken a single corpse with them. Had they simply considered it not worth the effort? To make things stranger, not a single monster attacked Chloe and her entourage. So much scattered carrion would normally attract monsters looking for food, but it was almost as if they had all fled somewhere. This was the polar opposite of their experiences thus far. There were supposed to be plenty of dull monsters in the mountains. Had they run from the Thousand Tricks? Had they sensed his power? The situation defied understanding, but it didn't bode well. It was like they were sending some sort of message. Of course, the crashing lightning was also capable of creating such a mess, but that would first require him to be attacked by so many monsters. Arnold had flashbacks to the encounter with the orc pack. This was enough to take even him by surprise.
What did you do? What are you after, Thousand Tricks?
Arnold, should we turn around?
Arnold's gaze followed the bloodied path. He silently shook his head. The road was safe as could be, its lack of monsters unsettling. They moved along far quicker than they had expected to.
By the way, what sort of monsters have bounties out here?
Bounties came in two varieties, There were ones governments placed on what they deemed dangerous, and ones placed by individuals. The management of bounties was entrusted to the Explorers Association, as they had many powerful hunters among their members. The Orc King back in Gula, for instance, very likely had a bounty on its head. However, Chloe didn't have time to confirm this. Any bounties in the Galist Mountains would be monsters. It wasn't uncommon for powerful monsters from other countries to flee to mountains to evade hunters.
There's multiple. For instance, there's a general-class troll who fled after destroying an entire village. Of course, there's no guarantee it's still in these mountains. After all, any hunters that can handle the Galist Mountains normally prefer treasure vaults.
Just like in Nebula Noobs, huh? Bounties on monsters, well, their pay doesn't match their difficulty.
It couldn't be helped a lot of the time. Monsters that ended up with bounties on their heads were almost always fairly intelligent. Even if they were weak, an intelligent monster might bolster itself with mana material and become something most hunters couldn't handle. Though Bandit Squad Barrel weren't monsters, similar circumstances likely drove the Earl to issue a named quest. Also, Arnold slaying that powerful orc was a stroke of good luck for the Explorers Association, but Chloe wasn't going to tell him that. Nothing stood in their way. It seemed safe to assume that nobody ever had traveled through the Galist mountain range as quickly as they were. Along the way, they ran into an unfamiliar fork in the road, but that was an obvious trap. There was most likely an intelligent monster in the vicinity. They reached a clearing with obvious signs of recent use. A investigated a fallen tree and an extinguished campfire.
Signs of battle and a campfire. They were here not too long ago. I'd say a couple hours or so.
Have we finally caught up to them?
They had made it. The sun was almost entirely beneath the horizon, but their easy day on the road had left them with plenty of stamina. They wouldn't be stopping their advance. Just as Chloe expected, Arnold wore a vicious smile.
We'll rest. 1 hour only. Then we move again. They're within our grasp.
They had never intended to enter the Galist mountain range. Just why had it come to this? For the first time in recent memory, Chloe had a headache induced by fatigue and stress. She let out a sigh.
When the carriage stopped shaking and the ground beneath us became level, I finally let myself relax. It had been the worst night of my life. Citri's danger effect had kicked all the monsters in the area into a frenzy. The resulting bloodbath swallowed up our carriage as we desperately tried to descend a mountain. We had been unable to account for the breeze. Shortly after Citri threw the potion, the wind changed directions and spread the potion over a wide radius. Unfortunately, it proved much more effective than she had anticipated. Monsters had surrounded us on all sides. If it weren't for the valiant efforts of everyone, except me, then we would have died in the Galist Mountains and nobody would have known it. But we made it. I'm alive. During my days as a hunter, I had survived dozens of perilous situations like this one, so I was able to stay calm. Tino, however, wasn't so used to it and was trembling in the corner of the carriage, her face a deathly complexion. A strange mucus had drenched her head, and her clothes were covered in green blood splatters. Liz had grabbed a hold of her and tossed her into the melee. At first I thought she'd be fine considering how she fought with such intensity, but her close brush with death really left her out of breath. I was worried she might have lasting trauma. The roving ogre's presence disappeared during the kerfuffle. And hey, wasn't that brawl better than fighting the roving ogre?
Monsters, scary. Shadows, scary. Save me, Master. Master?
Meanwhile, her mentor didn't seem the least bothered.
Woo! That was a blast! Let's do it again sometime.
Like Tino, Liz was covered in blood, and to think she had just washed out the previous bloodstains, but didn't seem to mind at all. I couldn't bring myself to argue with her. Yeah, uh-huh.
We should stop to bathe and wash our clothes, and primarily for the sake of black, white, and gray, I think we need to rest.
There was a lot I wanted to say, but for now I couldn't deny that we needed to rest. I decided to use that as a chance to talk about Citri's treatment of her helpers. Good idea. Night Palace is still some distance away. Then something occurred to me. I wanted to get off that cursed mountain as quickly as possible, but was that really a good idea? Citri's potion had been extraordinarily effective, so much so that I wasn't sure monster lure was really the right word for it. Those monsters had completely lost control and continued to blindly charge at Liz even after she had already killed dozens of them. If those frenzied monsters descended the mountain, they might attack nearby villages, and that would have been very bad. I knew that the Gallus Mountains were distant from any settlements, and it was unlikely anyone would get hurt if we left the monsters alone. But it still felt irresponsible just to leave them out there. I wanted to at least stay in the vicinity and keep an eye on the monsters until the potion wore off, even if I wasn't sure what I hoped to accomplish by doing that. Citri, how long does that potion last?
It varies per individual, but roughly a day.
That's not too bad. Luckily, the roving ogre seems to have given up on us. I checked the map and saw there was a small lake at the base of the mountains. It was connected to the river Liz had bathed in the previous night. We could get water, it would be an ideal spot to set up camp. And it was close by. The sun had only just set, but our horses couldn't go much farther. Considering both our circumstances and those of our surroundings, this seemed like the perfect plan. I'm on fire today. All right, let's rest by this lake. From there, we can tell what's going on in the mountains, albeit vaguely.
So we'll rest and wait for a bit. Excellent idea.
Right, you understand. You could tell in an instant. We'll wait until the potion's effects have worn off. I wish you could always be so intuitive. I knew you'd understand. Maybe I'm worrying too much, but I think we should sit still for a little bit.
Perish the thought. Considering the strength of our valiant foes, I think it's a sound idea. We are quite tired after all.
Valiant foes. What a strange choice of words.
Oh, Krai baby! How about we make a bonfire? It's been so long. We'll make a roaring one that you can see from the mountaintops. T and I can catch some food that we can roast. How about it? Doesn't that sound fun?
Good grief, she's full of energy. But a campfire? That doesn't sound half bad. When I still went on adventures with everyone, bonfires were a regular occurrence. If you've always got your guard up, then you won't have your energy when you need it. A first-rate hunter knows to rest when they can. Many monsters and animals are scared of fire, making campfires appropriate resting places. And, at the very least, I wanted Liz and Tino to wash themselves off. It's settled. We'll enjoy ourselves as much as we can while still making sure we're prepared to move when we need to.
Water. There's water, we made it. We're alive.
He looked like he might collapse at any moment. The other two joined him and plopped down on the lakeshore. They had had it worse than anyone in the group. Thanks for all your hard work. I'll try to get through to Citri, so just hang in there a bit longer. The shore was gorgeous and the chill water of the lake was transparent. It was a perfect spot for camping. I could imagine it being a very popular location if it wasn't so remote. There wasn't a hint of human civilization around us, and it felt almost sumptuous having it all to ourselves. Drink stared with fascination at its reflection in the water. In the distance, I could see animals of all sizes drinking from the lake. Neither they nor any monsters fought, creating a small bubble of peace. I couldn't spot any evidence of yesterday's tumult. It looked like the monster lure's effects hadn't reached all the way out here. I could look up and see the mountains we had descended just the previous day. At this distance, I couldn't tell what became of the frenzied monsters or the roving ogre, but I would at least be able to spot them instantly if they came our way. Liz let out a cheer as she dropped her bags and began to disrobe. Her healthy skin glimmering in the sunlight was like something out of a painting.
Yay! Krai baby, look, it's beautiful! I'm gonna go for a swim. Come on, T!
Returning to her senses, the young flustered apprentice tried to stop her master, but her efforts were in vain. In the blink of an eye, Liz was down to her underwear and splashing into the lake. You forgot to stretch before getting in. Tino looked at me and I gave her a small nod. While Liz could have benefited a tad more discretion, it was true that hunters couldn't let themselves be bothered by something like the sight of a party member in their small clothes. In my early days as a hunter, I let that sort of thing get to me, but I got used to it at some point or another. Tino momentarily hesitated, but then reached for the button at her collar.
No, Master, I can't do it.
And then she dived into the lake, still in her clothes. She could have at least removed her belt and shoes.
I suppose that's quite like her. Thief gear emphasizes mobility and doesn't obscure one's figure, yet she's still embarrassed over something like this.
I hadn't really thought about it until then, but thief gear was the polar opposite of the bulky robes worn by alchemists. It was probably to help them narrowly evade attacks. How Tino was able to go around like that would forever remain a mystery. I hoped she would never lose her sense of modesty. As always, Citri swiftly set up camp. She let the horses rest and fed them, and then got a fire going. With that done, she came to the shore and used a stick to draw a small image in the sand near me.
About our bonfire, Krai, what if we shaped it like this and we'll face it towards the mountain?
What's this? It was a strange shape, and not only that, it was divided into 3 segments. A dot, and a curved line?
It's a smiley face. It will require a bit of work, but what do you think?
Making a bonfire was already a fair amount of hard work. This would triple the effort required. Very playful of you, Citri. Who would even see the face? I guess I don't have any reason to say no. Yeah, why not? Sounds fun.
I believe we'll hit the apogee tonight, so I'd like to prepare a feast to match. Let's make sure the whole mountain range hears us.
Apogee? What apogee? I don't think we'll be crossing any peaks higher than what we crossed last night. I was about to ask Citri what she meant, but I heard Liz yelling from the lake.
Krai, baby, look, a crocodile. I caught a tasty-looking crocodile. Look amazing, isn't it?
A crocodile? And you plan to eat it? There's gotta be something better tasting out here. I turned around and saw Liz riding atop a thrashing 5-meter-long crocodile. She was completely feral. Tino tried to stop her. Black, white, and gray looked bewildered. Overwhelmed with fear and confusion, I said something completely worthless. So, there are crocodiles in this lake? Nature sure is full of dangers. I was glad I hadn't blindly dived in. A crocodile was just too much for me. The fires didn't snap and crackle so much as they roared and billowed. It was late into the night, and the moon shone in the sky, but it was bright as day on the lakeshore. Simple bonfires had been built with wood, gathered by black, white, and gray, which Citri enhanced with a potion. Even in the face of a gale, the flames continued to burn bright. As Citri suggested, we arranged the fires to make a smiley face. The design wasn't apparent up close, but someone in the mountains would notice it immediately. At these hours, nocturnal monsters would normally be active, but not one of them appeared. It was probably because Liz had killed so many for our dinner. Even in this ecosystem, our feral child came out at the top of the food chain. Not too far from the bonfires, Liz's catches were piled up. The pools of their drained blood were a bit off-putting. Citri deftly carved out the edible portions, but it was clearly too much for a group of our size to finish. It was without a doubt the most bizarre bonfire I had ever experienced. The fires seemed like they could burn forever and felt like overkill for a group of our size. Blood dripped from skewers of meat roasting by the fire, and a cauldron bubbled audibly. What added most to the eerie mood was black, white, and gray sprawled on the ground in Tino's look of anxiety. An outside observer might think we were conducting some strange ritual or a dubious Sabbath. Of course, this was just a fun bonfire, but even I had trouble enjoying myself with those 3 collapsed in Tino's clear uncertainty. Only Liz and Citri were their normal selves. Citri was cooking and Liz was playing in the lake.
What do you think, Krai? I'd say things have gone perfectly. I'm certain someone on the mountainside can look down and see a big smile.
I didn't have anything against her playful spirit, but I had something else on my mind. I was worried about our 3 helpers who had been forced to gather a plethora of firewood and now looked on the verge of death. It seemed perfectly reasonable that gathering wood after an expedition through the mountains would be tough on them. It was true. One of our members immediately started hunting big game, but she couldn't be considered within the norm. While I had been preoccupied watching Tino and Liz play in the lake, Citri had been dishing out orders. I would have stopped her if I had noticed in time, but I caught on too late. It was good to take joy in small things. Under the right circumstances, I could see myself arranging bonfires in a smiley face. But I also believed in causing as little trouble for other people as I could. Even if Citri was within her rights as their employer, I found it abhorrent that she would push black, white, and gray so hard in the name of her personal enjoyment. While roasting a skewer of crocodile meat for me, Citri grinned. It was an expression of earnest joy and devoid of ill intent. A bit melancholic, I let out a small sigh. Citri, aren't you working those 3 a bit too hard?
You think so?
I knew from the start that her treatment of black, white, and gray wasn't driven by malice. She probably just didn't consider their exhaustion to be anything noteworthy. Our adventures were always putting us in mortal danger, so gathering firewood after a battle probably didn't seem like much to her. Excessive treasure hunting had affected her way of thinking. It was our first trip together in some time, and I was determined to use that short period to return her thinking to the realm of common sense.
but they're, well, criminals.
This was unexpected. Criminals? When she mentioned it, I realized they clearly didn't look like civilians. But there were plenty of hunters who looked like crooks, so I never imagined that those three might actually be criminals. Except, why was she hiring criminals? Had the Empire offered them a job as part of their reintegration into society? I didn't know much about the sort of personal connections Citri had, but maybe this was a form of penal labor? I still thought she was going too far. But I couldn't easily interfere if it really was penal labor. I furrowed my brow, but Citri just smiled reassuringly.
But if you'd like me to, I'll stop pushing them so hard.
Huh? This isn't a form of punishment for them?
It is, of course, in a manner of speaking. However, thanks to you, I've determined their capabilities.
With a smile, she tilted her head and added a bit about something not being worth swapping out parts or holding on to too tightly. I didn't know what she was on about, but I figured their contributions over the past few days were sufficient punishment for them. It was possible they hadn't even done anything serious, and they seemed to have done everything. Citri asked of them, "Don't you think it's time to let them off the hook?" I had wavered when I learned they were criminals, but my initial feelings hadn't changed. I had many experiences of being targeted by criminals. I was of the opinion that they should all be thrown in jail. But the labors of Black, White, and Gray had elicited a bit of sympathy in me. It would be different if they were murderers, but if they were petty criminals, then I felt they had served their time. Of course, it wasn't my place to judge if they should be forgiven. After a moment of contemplation, Citri removed a key from her pocket and pressed it into my hand.
They haven't done anything serious. You can release them. I'm sure they'll be very grateful.
Citri gripped my hand for a few seconds before gently letting go. A small golden key was left in my palm.
That's the key to their collars. Removing their collars will set them free.
That warm smile of hers that I had seen so many times didn't seem to carry any deception. A key is all it takes. I held it between my fingers. But they're criminals? Considering their exhaustion, I'd like to set them free as soon as I can. But they're criminals? Well, even if I let them go, they might not be able to get to a town in their current state. Setting them free out here would just be cruel. There's still time to consider it. I'll have to wait for the right timing. Citri nodded repeatedly with a sparkle in her eyes. Maybe she had already reached the same conclusion as me, or maybe she had been unable to let them go until I said something. It was possible. Citri, Liz, just about everyone I knew, really. They all paid too much regard to the words of a figurehead clan leader. You can leave them to me. They look a bit tired, so I'm going to let them rest. Is that fine?
Very well. I'll inform Lizzie, and those three, that I've left matters in your care.
Her face was flushed and her breathing was a bit heavy. Now then, what am I going to say to Black, White, and Gray? It was while the roving ogre was reconsidering its approach to dispatching the first group of humans that it noticed the arrival of a new group of humans. The wind, the noises, every bit of the Gallus Mountains was an ally and informant to the roving ogre. Even at a distance, it could tell this new party was a capable one, especially the large man at the front. He seemed on par with the girl who'd hurled the burning rock. Clearly, one group entering these remote mountains after another was no coincidence. The roving ogre knew it had to destroy both of them, but it couldn't do that alone. So what would it do? The answer was simple. It didn't require a moment's consideration. It would pit the two parties against each other. The roving ogre was intelligent enough to discern its prey's weaknesses, intelligent enough to parse human speech. From a mountain's peak, the roving ogre narrowed its small eyes as it watched the large carriage move along the path. Its body churned and shifted, its green skin slowly changed color. Its flesh groaned as it expanded and sprouted hair. After a few seconds, its transformation was complete. Silently, a savage grin formed on the monster's lips. With its long limbs, it descended the mountain with incredible speed. Being arrested would have been better than this. They had been angry when the shackles were first put on them. When they had been told they would be carriage chauffeurs, they started to consider ways they might remove the collars and resist if given the opportunity. Now all they felt was profound despair and resignation. Black, White, and Gray all had long histories of fighting knights and hunters. They couldn't remember how many lives they had taken and had even laughed as they finished off someone begging to be spared. Yet even they considered the infamous grieving souls to be insane. They'd lost all will to resist. Now they understood why they had been so easily caught by those sisters. It was a simple matter of how many crucibles they had overcome. Those early days of the vacation spent being treated like slaves now seemed heavenly compared to the hell that the previous night had been. After being pitted in a life-or-death battle against an unending horde of monsters, they had reached their limits physically and mentally. Their swords were coated in blood and fat, and their blades had gone dull. Their coats had been drenched with blood. A good wash probably wouldn't be enough to remove the stains and scent. If they found themselves in the same situation again, one of them would surely die. Really, all three of them might die. They were certain that even if they died, that carriage would probably keep moving like nothing had even happened. Something about that idea was absolutely terrifying to them. They knew the Thousand Tricks was a level 8 hunter who had resolved a number of incidents. They were reminded of this as their vacation turned into a brutal gauntlet of monsters and calamities. There was the lightning elemental, the massive orcs in their fort. There was the blatantly absurd number of monsters attacking them on the path through the mountains. Then there was the one attacking indiscriminately, the worst of them all, the roving ogre. Given the choice, an encounter with any of those would have prompted Black, White, and Gray to flee immediately. However, the Thousand Tricks and his party members deemed it a vacation. Sometimes they avoided the trouble, other times they shoved it onto other hunters, and sometimes they forced their way through. On the mountain path, they laughed as they rolled down the path. Black, White, and Gray had risked their lives to open up. During the escape from the roving ogre, they had nearly been handed over as a sacrifice. Black had sensed a strong air of normalcy from their behavior. The stifled Shadow, the other hunter, they were accustomed to near-death encounters. They had probably encountered even worse. So they laughed. So they didn't stop. The stifled Shadow was registered as a level 6, but that obviously wasn't an accurate reflection of her strength and experience. It didn't seem possible. No matter how hard they tried to see it, her appearance didn't betray a single hint of her strength, experience, determination, or even her malice. Black hugged her knees and ruminated as a means of avoiding reality. There was no way out of this despair. The only light awaiting them was that of their own demise. But would that woman, that grinning, remorseless woman who collared them, would she permit such succor? Are you okay? Black was instantly pulled from her stupor, and she accidentally let out a small shriek. White, who had been still as a corpse, and Gray, whose consciousness had been a matter up for debate, both jumped up as though the Reaper had come knocking. The voice calling to them had been feeble, unintimidating. This voice was the most terrifying of them all. Krai Andrey, the Thousand Tricks, the leader of grieving souls and the man who commanded absolute loyalty from both the stifled Shadow and the ignoble. He was the only one whose strength Black and the others had been unable to gauge. As always, he didn't show even a hint of power. His physique was frail and not all like a hunter's, nor did he have the distinct aura of someone who had absorbed large quantities of mana material. He didn't wear armor or carry a weapon, and his stance was wide open. If they saw him on the street, they would have just taken him for another civilian. But that was what made him scary. His deep black eyes were mellow. Unlike the stifled Shadow, he never yelled, and unlike the ignoble, he didn't grin at every little thing, but he also wasn't a clear anomaly like Killiam. On the road, they had constantly watched and observed him. He hadn't done anything of note. He never showed any particular regard for his comrades or engaged the hordes of monsters. He didn't do anything exceptional or show any shift in his emotions. He seemed ordinary. However, he was the one who established the vacation's objective. The stifled Shadow and the ignoble were no doubt his mistresses. They looked at him with expressions tinged with lust. Their actions made with the desire to avoid his wrath. There was no way that man was sane. At their first meeting, he nearly had them liquidated for no reason. If he had those two at his beck and call, then Black didn't want to imagine what might happen to those who opposed him. Whatever it was, it probably wouldn't be over quickly.
Why, what is it, sir?
This was the man who had been so audacious before their departure. Black knew how he felt. The scariest people were the ones who didn't blow up immediately. She followed Gray's example and lowered her head. If only a little bit, she was trying not to acknowledge the situation, to not look at it directly. You don't need to bow down or anything. But let me get straight to the point. I've decided to release you all. I've got Citri's permission. Black looked up in surprise. White and Gray also looked at him with vague expressions. Release? Did he just say release? The Thousand Tricks' eyebrows twitched and he narrowed his eyes. A small key was in his hand. It was the key to their collars. He was full of openings. From his spot, Gray could snatch the key in the blink of an eye, but he didn't move a muscle. Of course I won't let you go this minute. It's dangerous out here and I heard you guys are criminals apparently. You wouldn't really be repaying your debt to society if I let you go so easily. right? Black almost asked him where he got off saying things like that, but stopped herself. They were indeed criminals, and it would be bad news for them if all their crimes were brought to light. But Citri and Liz already had that covered. The Thousand Tricks smiled faintly. It was a smile that looked completely natural, genuine. He held up the key and dangled it in front of them. But I also know that what you guys did was nothing serious. You've done a good job following Citri's orders these last few days, and I think that's enough to repay your debt to society. If you behave, I'll remove the collars and let you all free once we get somewhere safe. Taken at face value, those seemed like incredibly kind words, but Black saw White's cheek twitch with fear. They were criminals. They had scraped by breaking laws of all sorts and even by killing. They knew their offenses were grave, but this man had just written those deeds off as nothing serious. They couldn't be sure how the Thousand Tricks interpreted their silence, but he quickly waved his hands. Oh, don't worry. The road from here on is fairly safe, and I don't think we'll be fighting anything. I still need you to drive the carriage, but you can go slowly. We're in no rush. This is a vacation after all. Got it? Vacation. That despicable word caused Black to shiver. It was a sweet word. A word clearly meant to stoke the flames of hope, but she and her cohorts never had any say in the matter. All they could do was nod along like loyal soldiers. White and Gray nodded wordlessly. She followed suit. The Thousand Tricks saw their expressions and looked relieved. And as though he had been waiting for that specific moment, a light glimmered from the direction of the mountains.
Here you go. It's been so long since I last made stew. I had a limited range of spices and potions available to me, so I don't think it'll be up to par.
Ooh, thanks. It's really good.
Thank goodness Lizzie only brought me strange meat. Blending the flavors was quite troublesome.
What in the world caused that flash of light in the mountains? I wondered as I savored Citri's delicious stew. Next to the campfire, Liz sat with her legs folded and ate some unidentified meat straight off the bone. Next to her was Tino, contrasting starkly with her mentor as she ate with impeccable manners. The light had faded after only a second. Nothing came after it, which made me think I might be paying it too much mind, but it still bothered me. Could it have been a natural phenomenon? The smart sisters didn't seem to be worried about it. Citri was smart. She would be able to offer an educated guess. I sat down next to her, which seemed to catch her off guard. Looking strangely pleased, she moved over so our shoulders brushed against each other. A sweet and soothing scent drifted from her well-maintained hair. Citri, about that light?
Oh, indeed. The usual light.
The usual light. The usual, huh? The outdoors sure is dangerous. We were supposed to be on vacation, but our stops at Elan, Gula, and the Galist Mountains all had us narrowly avoiding danger. How did traveling merchants and road-bound people get by? If only I knew their secrets. They're being awfully quiet. If that light is normal, then do we really need to run? Are we gonna run?
I'd say it's still a bit too early to be moving, and we're still eating.
Unlike me, Citri wasn't afraid. She was accustomed to traveling. There were multiple chunks of meat skewered over the fire, and there was also stew and fish. It was way too much for us to load into the carriage. My plan was to spend a night at the lake. If we got up and left, that would mean another trek in the darkness. And I had just told Black, White, and Gray that I wasn't going to work them too hard. As I wondered what to do, I grimaced and ate my stew. Then, Citri had an idea. She sure seemed to be having fun, considering the circumstances.
Judging by the position of the light, I think their arrival shouldn't be too much longer. Oh, I know. It's only a bit, but I do have some liquor. Shall I bring it out?
I see. So it won't be much longer. Wait, why is she so certain it's headed our way? It might just be a natural phenomenon. And what even was that light? I swallowed my pride and checked with the all-knowing Citri. By the way, Citri, what do you think is out there? She pulled out a fine-looking bottle and glass, then smiled while she poured a drink.
It's Arnold and Company.
I smiled. I found myself accepting the drink she was offering me. It must have been something strong because I felt a burning heat on my palate. Citri grinned and looked up at the night sky with flushed cheeks. What? What? Why's Arnold out here? I don't understand. I didn't understand why Arnold was in the mountains. I didn't understand how Citri discerned that from just a flash of light. Even if I did somehow understand either of those things, I still couldn't possibly fathom how Citri could sit there and laugh about it. I grinned back at her, my head filled with question marks.
I imagine that light was from that sword made from a thunder dragon. Materials recovered from dragons truly are first class. According to one theory, even after dragons and similar mythical beings die, their flesh remains unaware and continues to retain its power. Don't you find that incredibly romantic?
Citri's voice was rosy and enraptured, but I couldn't say I shared her sentiments. I guess we had different sensibilities. All I knew about thunder dragons was that they were immensely powerful, even by dragon standards, and that they were delicious when Citri roasted them with teriyaki. Hold on a minute. Did she just say Arnold's coming our way? And with a super powerful weapon in hand, can this get any worse?
City, get away from Crybaby, you're too close. Scoot, scoot. I've got eyes in the back of my head, you know.
Forgive me, Krai. We'll have to continue at a later date.
Like hell you're gonna continue. Were you born without common sense? You too, Crybaby. Why are you getting cozy with her? Didn't we just promise we'd be together forever?
What does she mean by getting cozy? How can I do that when Arnold's approach has me shivering? Oblivious to my state of panic, Liz shoved Citri aside. Because she had just been in the lake, she was a bit chilly, causing me to shiver even more. Liz, your clothes are cold. Go dry them off or you'll get sick.
How could they be cold if I took them off before getting into the lake? Are they in the way? I see. Should I take them off then?
Liz didn't hesitate to start, but Tino worked up the courage to jump on her from behind.
Lizzie, stop that! It's improper!
She was immediately thrown off, but just as quickly, she got back up and tackled Liz. It was a shame they had to fight like this even though they had just bathed in the lake. I was watching their siblings suckle, unsure what to do. It had blonde hair, a muscular body that stood almost 2 meters tall, and its eyes glimmered with a yellow hue. Its arms and legs were well developed but oddly long. But what took me by surprise was its lack of clothes. A simple rag around its waist was the only hint of good sense. Citri and Liz looked at it with wide eyes. Tino was frozen in place. Instinctively, I smiled and asked it a question. Smiles were one of my defensive techniques. Who might you be? The mysterious blonde macho narrowed its eyes and looked strangely confident.
Arnold, been a while.
Arnold? I leaped up from my spot by the fire. He sure has changed, but I guess that long hair does look like his. Same eye color as well, but he still looks different enough that I never would have guessed it was him. Something's off. I looked him over and then it hit me. Did you lose weight?
Crybaby, is that really the first thing you should ask?
What happened to your sword?
Ditched it. It was junk.
Apparently, he threw away an ultra-powerful sword made out of the parts of a thunder dragon.
First, we need to get you some clothes.
City?
What to do? I had been keeping an eye out, but I wasn't expecting him to show up half-naked and unarmed. What in the world had happened to Arnold? I took a close look, but I just couldn't reconcile with the idea that it was him. It occurred to me that, just maybe, I might have been tired. Calm down, Krai Andrey. If he's not Arnold, then he wouldn't be calling himself Arnold. If it was someone pretending to be him, then they would probably do a better job, which means this must be Arnold. For starters, why not have some stew? There's also meat. Meat thought in further.
Crybaby, I love this part of you.
I should take notes.
Master is God. Master is God.
Killiam, a solitary eater, appeared from nowhere.
Kill!
Arnold dashed forward, kicked the roasting meat with his long legs, and knocked over the cauldron of stew. He pointed at me and smiled, like a savage beast.
Tonight, you die.
No doubt about it, this is Arnold.
Die, all of you.
Arnold, calm down. If I've done something wrong, I'll apologize. He swung his arms with a wild fury that you don't see very often. He smashed our bottles and knocked our dishes onto the ground. I tried desperately to apologize, but he didn't listen. He shoved his arms into a bonfire we had worked so hard to set up and flung the burning wood into the air. Is he really human?
Fight me.
Calm down, Arnold. Nothing I've done to you has been on purpose. Why are you so angry? It's my fault. It's all my fault. I'll apologize, so forgive me. He seemed to be deliberately avoiding me. Our camping gear was bashed and battered, but I could tell his conscience was holding him back. Still, his strength was incredible, but in a different sense than what I had seen before. I thought this must be what happens when a level 7 from the Land of Fog gets serious. As he thrashed around with movements almost inhuman, I desperately tried to placate him. Arnold, this won't solve anything. If something is bothering you, I'll hear you out. Okay. Aren't we both men of the Imperial capital? Should I grovel? I can grovel. I'll grovel, so just stop that creepy convulsing. I'm a pacifist. I want to resolve everything without fighting, and I won't hesitate to put my forehead to the dirt if it's necessary. I put my arms forward, bent my knees, and quickly prostrated. I didn't know what I was apologizing for, but I didn't need a reason. I put as much sincerity in as I could. Arnold, I'm so sorry for everything. Please forgive me.
What are you doing?
A pleasant breeze blew across the land. Not another soul could be seen across the endless plains that spread out around us. Next to our carriage, Killiam rode atop Drink, both of them content as could be. If their appearances were more, shall we say, normal, then they would probably make for a very picturesque sight. I let out a big yawn and idly ran my hands through Tino's hair as she rested her head in my lap. Her hair was so silky, just touching it put my spirit at ease. As I did this, she let out a small groan. Oh, good morning, Tino. Tino slowly opened her eyelids. The dark rings that had been under her eyes were now entirely gone. She looked up at me, vacantly, but tried to sit up when she realized the position she was in. However, her body wouldn't comply, and all she could do was writhe in pain.
Oh.
Most people wouldn't be able to move at all in your condition. I'd advise you to keep still, okay, T?
What do you mean?
With teary eyes, Tino looked at me in confusion. She didn't show the slightest bit of the courage she had as Super Tino. But that was fine. Too much time in that state would destroy her.
What about Arnold?
Apparently, she had forgotten what had occurred. I wasn't sure what to say, but Liz butted in before I could come up with a good answer.
You got your ass kicked so badly it was comical. If you could move, I'd be training you to the bone.
Lizzie, there's no need to put it like that.
Tino froze with shock. I stroked her head again and smiled. Arnold's a level 7. I knew you wouldn't win against him. Still, you looked very cool back there.
Master, please don't be so rough on me.
I'll jump to the conclusion and say that Tino lost. Put simply, Super Tino was super strong, but Arnold was super duper strong. Super Tino attacked with superhuman speed, a rate comparable to Liz's, but Arnold blocked each hit. According to Liz, Super Tino's defeat was because of her technique, or lack thereof. The mask had unleashed the strength within her, but her technical knowledge couldn't keep up. Super Tino was super fast, but not as fast as Arnold's super lightning. Even still, Tino's super impressive latent powers were enough to prevent his lightning from leaving any lasting injuries. It wasn't a close battle, though you could still say she fought well, considering she had been up against a genuine level 7. Even if she lost, she still bought time, which meant victory for Liz and Seatree. Liz dismantled the roving ogre, and Seatree knocked out Arnold's friends with some suspicious potion. Liz then hurled a dismembered part of the ogre at Arnold. We grabbed the unconscious Tino, got in the carriage, and booked it out of there. Nobody chased after us. The last thing I saw was Arnold fighting off the roving ogre after it regenerated and attacked the unconscious hunters. I felt a bit bad for them, but they attacked first, and I figured they would manage somehow. Chloe shouted something at me that I pretended not to hear. I was on vacation. I didn't want to hear about named quests and whatnot. We then headed towards my initial destination, Night Palace. Tino remained silent after hearing my explanation.
I'm sorry, Master. I failed.
Don't worry about it, Tino. Failure's a part of getting stronger. Even grieving souls have had their share of defeat. Even Liz got stronger through failure.
Lizzie did?
Liz bashfully elbowed me as though telling me to cut it out. My childhood friends were extremely talented, but they weren't infallible. I didn't share that talent, so I didn't bother. But I watched over every bit of effort, every defeat, and every victory my friends had. Unyielding effort and an iron will were the keys to getting stronger. The path my friends had once walked was no doubt the same path Tino was walking. You've gotten really strong, Tino. It's not all about wins and losses. I'm sure that one day you'll become a superb hunter. I was surprised to see just how powerful she had become when she put on Evolve Greed. I could only recall a few other relics in my collection capable of something so impressive, but I couldn't imagine the mask drawing so much power from anyone. A relic's compatibility could vary from person to person, And Evolve Greed seemed like a perfect match with Tino. I hoped she'd wear the mask again so I could test it out a bit. I found my thoughts interrupted by Tino.
Will I be able to join Grieving Souls one day?
I answered immediately as I stroked her hair. Of course. Liz and Citri were both smiling. I was certain that as long as she continued to hope for it, her dream would certainly come true. Hope was integral to becoming an excellent hunter.